And William Breiannis and I are live again, having another conversation about religion and politics, I suppose.
That's the, whatever you want to discuss, we're ready to have this conversation.
Well, I was interested in what you were saying about the difficulties of white Muslims in America, and I mean, what you described basically described, um, I think, most Americans, because all these groups are well, demoralized, confused, preferring inaction um, to action, preferring ambiguity to clarity. Um, could I just say that we can hear your chair rocking,
Oh, I'm
which
sorry.
may be distracting for some.
My apologies.
So,
I'm a hermit. I like to just sit in my rocking chair, and this is where I do most of my work. I'm an old man.
I do. Well, you don't look it, but it is a sort of American thing. I think sitting on the veranda with one's rocking chair, and okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I do want to comment to something that you said, and there's two aspects that you had brought up. The first thing is specifically white Muslims, and secondly, the community at large in America. And I think that it's best to start with the community at large in America, I think.
Mhm.
And what I would say about that is that, you know, Americans, and I always assume, and that's not necessarily the best thing to do, but I always assume that it's spread. So it's not just in America any longer. We export this type of mentality, and that is that everybody is so caught up in the rat race, everybody is so caught up in their day-to-day needs that they're not able to focus on anything of importance. And I remember a friend of mine. He showed me a passage in Uncle Tom's Cabin, this classical book. I haven't read
Mhm.
this since I was a young, a very young man, maybe in my teens or something like this. But
I haven't
so
read it, but it's by Harriet Beecher Stowe, is it not?
yes, yes.
Mm.
So there's a passage in there wherein there's a description of how they would get the slaves to capitulate, basically. And so when they brought them off of the ships, they would take them on this long inner journey through the country. And what they would do is that they would walk them all day long and march them all day long and push them all day long. And there would be threats, there would be, beatings and these types of things. And so there was this dehumanizing of them during the day. And
Mhm.
then in the evening, they would set up camp and they would, start a fire, they would cook food, and, they would encourage them to be even intoxicated in some cases. But they would have music, they would have dancing, they would have conversation, storytelling, all of these things at night to entertain them. And so
Mhm.
the next morning they would work them again, and then at night they would entertain them again. And in reality, this is the same method that our nation has used on the people, to where now we're being pushed and worked. We're serfs. The American citizens are serfs. I'd say a good 90% of American citizens are serfs. We have to actually pay our government for the right to earn our living. We actually have to pay our government for everything that we do, whether it's our living, our earning wages, whether it's our paying our rent, whether it's our mortgages, whether it's our buying food, whether it's our transportation. We have to actually pay our government for the right to do anything in this country. And people don't realize this, but this is serfdom. And so, but what's more than that is that we're literally worked. We're pushed to work. And at work, many people are denigrated. People often complain about their treatment at work. Nobody likes their job, all of these things. But some of that has to do with the way that they're treated and dehumanized, seen as a cog in the wheel, even in their workplace, rather than a human being that's meaningful. And we've lost that, especially when you get to big box stores such as Walmart and Home Depot and all of these places. And I'm not demonizing those things necessarily, But I'm saying that when we dealt with mom and pop shops or local stores, then the workers, the employees, they were humanized. They were people from the neighborhood. They were family members and the like. And now it's not like that. And so they're dehumanized during the day. And then when they get off work, what do? They're entertained. They're entertained with music. They're entertained with social media. They're entertained with movies and television and the like. And so this is the pattern of the basic the general American population is they work all day in jobs most of them don't like, and then at night they entertain themselves until they go into a trance state, meaning that they relax and they numb themselves, and they're not aware of what's going on around them. And some even people who do deal with politics, and I'm sure that this is the case with many of your viewers, to be honest with you, no matter how serious of a topic you're talking about, even me pointing out the fact that most of Americans, 90% of Americans are serfs in reality, and pointing something as serious as that out, people will watch this as a form of entertainment, and it's a relief. It's an escape from their day-to-day lives. And so this is the general practice of Americans, is that they work, and then in the evenings they distract themselves, and then in the weekend they have this release, whatever that release may be. Most of them, I don't want to say most of them, but many of them, going to parks or whatever it is, hanging out with friends or the like. And so this is the pattern of American life. And what that means is that they're too distracted, they're too busy to really care about what's going on in the political world. They'll complain about the economics. They'll complain about the political system. They'll complain about, oh, Biden is this or Trump is that. They'll complain about these things, but nobody's actually doing anything. And even when those people do, oftentimes, for example, we'll just bring up BLM as an example, and I'm not pro this group at all. I have my own grievances against this group, but that's neither here nor there. But a lot of people, they'll join something like that and they'll go out and they'll picket. We had a situation here where they actually tried to put a small business out of business by blocking the path to their store and things like that. But a lot of times what we see is those people who do that, they're not doing it because they want to affect change. They're doing it because they want to feel like they're a part of something. They want to feel like they're part of an inner group. They're welcome somewhere or something like that. So basically what I'm saying is that Americans are, even that in itself is a way of distracting themselves or getting out of their day to day. And so what I'm saying is, because of the lifestyle, the serfdom of the American people, they work all day, they're entertained and distracted at night, and then they find some relief in the weekends. They're distracted by the system itself from anything of real importance, anything of real depth. And even if we had a conversation and we wanted to talk about politics and we wanted to talk about the state of affairs, oftentimes this breaks down into party politics, or whatever is the latest trend. People will parrot what they've read on social media or the like. They haven't thought about it. They don't have an original idea. They're literally just saying what their peers have said on social media. Or if we talk about religion, then of course this is also something that people don't, we don't talk about that, and to each their own, and all of these things, and they don't actually take time to think about their own existence any longer. They don't take time to think about who they are as human beings, where they stand, what are their beliefs, what are their practices. And so these two main topics that really should take a center place in our lives is, and when I say politics, we can talk about broad based, but even local politics, neighborhood politics. These things should be a focus in our lives, and we should be living to affect change, to impact and leave our communities better, our societies better. But these things are seen as taboo, and when you talk about them, people are uncomfortable and they don't want to have these conversations. So the reality is that the American population, it's not that this is their state for the most part. For the most part, there are exceptions, of course. This is why I only said 90% are serfs, because there are those people who are still entrepreneurs. There are those who are independent thinkers and the like. But the vast majority of Americans, they're not fringe groups. They're actually a whole they feel like they're subcultures. Oh, we're this, we're that, we're this political party, or we're part of that movement, or we're even part of this. Maybe I'm a punk rocker or something like that, a skateboarder, whatever the case might be. And so they see themselves as being unique, a unique part of this subculture. But the fact is that they're just part of the distracted masses for the most part, unfortunately.
Hmm. And also, these conversations are difficult anyway, even with people who are dedicated to solving the problem, because people will have their different solutions and their different definitions of words that they may never agree on. And so many egos are at stake. Um,
Absolutely.
and I've always wondered whether, starting a debating society would do any good, or people will just sort of, run away from that, whether it's, a challenge that would attract people, or would, repel others.
I
I honestly don't know.
I honestly think that the people, and again, this is part of the problem, the people are ill-equipped for this. And so, people have a hard time. They have a difficulty following simple logic. They have a difficulty following simple lines of reasoning, because and all of my children. I have 9 children. All right, and
Mm-hmm.
all but one of my children have been homeschooled, and
Mm-hmm.
so and the success rate. Just I'm putting this out there because I want to for those people who are against homeschooling and the like. I have a college grad. I have one, my eldest. He went to college for a year. He entered into college when he was 16. He didn't like college. He prefers labor. He prefers working with his hands. My second oldest, she's a college graduate. My third oldest, he's oh, no, he's my fourth oldest. Sorry, he's on the dean's list. And my 17-year-old is entering college right now. He actually just got admitted to college. So my point being is that we've homeschooled them and to a level of proficiency. And I mentioned that only to say that the education system in America is broken. We don't actually educate children now. When a person graduates high school, they're not even prepared to enter into college. They have to take remedial courses. They have to take tests to see what level of remedial courses. They might have 2 and 3 levels of remedial courses that they should have learned in high school, but they hadn't. So they have to take these courses just to prepare them for levels of higher learning. And so we see this again and again. They're not taught academics. They're taught what can we say, agendas. And so in the past, and this is something that Catholic schools were great for, is teaching the humanities, teaching the trivium and the quadrivium. So the trivium, of course, teaching them grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And grammar is understanding the tools. Logic is how to use those tools, and rhetoric is how to communicate those tools. And so they taught them that language and other sciences and the like. They would teach them in this stage: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. How to how to grasp the tools, then how to understand the tools for yourself, and then how to communicate that to other people. This was their way. And then they would, of course, have the quadrivium as well, where they would teach math from different dimensions. So they would teach math. They would teach geometry, which is math in shape, if you will. Then they would teach music, which is math in time. And then they would teach astronomy, which is math in space or 3 dimensions. And so, in this way, a person, when they graduated from these courses, they were well prepared to think, and they were well prepared to communicate ideas. And today, our children, meaning society's children, they don't know how. If you said to them, "How do you deduce? How do you infer?" They wouldn't understand these basic terms of logic. And so, how do you have a debate society when people aren't even taught basic logic? They don't know what a syllogism is. They don't know how to construct a proper hypothesis. And so, though that sounds wonderful, and I think that if we return to that, to where we taught people how to use logic and how to communicate that via rhetoric, that this would change society. But I actually think that that's why it's no longer taught in schools, because they don't want people to be free thinkers anymore. And this is a control method. The education system itself, in a lot of ways, is control method. You have now in schools, and I don't want to just keep talking, but and I also don't want to rant. But the fact of the matter is, in the school system, you have people who are teaching this insanity that Billy can be, Billy Joe or something like that. This boy can decide to be a girl when he's 7 years old. It's okay. How do you feel today? Do you feel like a boy or a girl? How should we call you, he or she? Asking children this is actually planting seeds of corruption in a young mind. And so they'll busy themselves. They'll spend a whole period doing this as opposed to actually teaching something that these children need, such as,
Mhm.
good communication skills.
And do you think the reason why they waste the time of children is because they are, in fact, hiding the failure of education?
It's all control, and in a lot of ways, it's indoctrination, it's control. In a lot of ways, it's glorified babysitter. So, one of the things that we mentioned in our last conversation was women in the workplace. How this began. I think that we discussed that, women in the workplace, and how this began after World War II, because women had been forced into the workplace because the men weren't there, and then the corporations didn't want to lose that labor force, that 50% of the labor force, if you will. And so now it's been normalized for women in the workplace. Now you have men and women, and the cost of living is so high that we need two income households where the male and
Mhm.
the female are both earning. So who then raises the children, right? And so it's been normalized that they go to public schools. Public schools are free. What that means is that you have a free babysitter, right? And a lot, I know personally, I've been in neighborhoods where the whole neighborhood sees the school as free babysitting service.
Mhm. But that is the problem. Yes, you can just babysit them when they are, at an age where they're not supposed to be learning anything. But if you don't educate them properly,
More than anything else.
even if you would just want slaves and not very clever people, they should at least be able to, read, write, and count, so that
Well, and
people might want to hire
writing
them.
writing is an excellent example. Here in the U.S., they don't even teach cursive anymore. A child doesn't need to use cursive. They don't learn penmanship because, oh, why? When they have phones now, everybody texts. Yes, but penmanship says something about our character. Penmanship says
Yes.
something about our persona. How we write actually indicates. Graphology is a wonderful science. People can read
Mhm.
you through your handwriting, and when you
Yes.
remove that from a child, you're really stunting their growth intellectually, maturity, as far as maturity and the like. And
And the
that's
ability to
unfortunately the
take.
reality.
Yes, and you stop them if they can't write clearly and quickly, they can't take notes at lectures at
Absolutely.
university.
Absolutely. And they honestly, if they can't write, they can't communicate. If they can't write well, most of the time, if they cannot write well, they can't communicate well.
Mm. And
How do
grammar.
you how do you preserve an idea? How do you share an idea? And somebody could say, well, they type it up. If that was true, we wouldn't have all of this slang writing where I have to figure out what are they trying to say here because they're missing 8 letters from this word. So
Mm.
the fact is that they don't even know how people don't even know how to spell anymore. They rely upon spell check and all of these things because they don't even know how to spell, and this is a failure of the education system here.
Or even the idea that a proper sentence has a subject and a verb, but otherwise it doesn't mean anything. It's just a meaningless phrase.
And
And
so I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but this is a wonderful point that you just made, and that is that through teaching grammar, you teach that there is right and wrong. You teach that there's rules, inherent rules in all that we do. This is again, it's part of discipline built into the education. But if they remove that, then you also remove that lesson for the students.
yes, I think it was Montaigne who said that grammar is the logic of language. And if you can't express yourself in a logical way that is comprehensible to your listener, then you'll just be getting frustrated and angry that people apparently can't understand you, or you might think they're deliberately misunderstanding you, but it's because you can't express yourself properly. I often find that when I'm trying to communicate ideas with them. I mean, okay, I say I tend to win arguments. So people don't like engaging with me because they don't know what to say to, challenge what I say. So they avoid it altogether, or they just get angry when, they somehow don't agree, and they somehow can't communicate how they don't agree, and then they just get angry and, leave the room, so to speak. And this is, well, a failure on their part, because I think a lot of expression onto paper or words is a way of communicating your feelings and solving problems. And if you don't manage to express them properly, all your feelings will just stay inside as bad feelings that you may wish to push aside or deny or avoid, and you never solve the problem.
And that last point was a good point. I had something else I was going to say, but that last point is a good point. And that is, a lot of times people have pent up emotions. They don't know how to express their emotions. They don't know how to express their trauma. And so they lock it in, and they live with these traumas. They live with these anxieties. They live with these emotions that they don't know how to deal with, because they haven't learned how to, again, communicate them to other people. What I just taught a class last night, and in my community. And as a sidetrack digression that I went into, I spoke about foul language. And I think that this is actually how I started to speak to this guy Spencer, whoever he is, on Twitter. And I don't want to have that conversation, but the point is that, because he used foul language and to a Muslim sister, and I addressed that. But the fact of the matter is that I said the same thing to him, and that is that one of the things that makes one of the distinct features of our humanity that elevates us above animals. It's something that is quite distinctly human, and that is language, our ability to communicate. And somebody could say, well, animals have their own languages. That's true, but they don't have the complexity that we have. They just simply don't. We are the only ones that can use symbols and signs to communicate our ideas, and we use these sounds that we make as a way to communicate with one another in different languages and in different times even. So for example, this video, I could communicate with somebody. I may be communicating with somebody 10 years into the future, and so we have this ability that other creatures don't have. Now, what happens is that when a person is not able to communicate their ideas, when a person is not able to communicate their feelings even, then what happens is, we used to call those people savages. And the word savage, I don't remember the exact etymology, but if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, but it was somebody who was not able to articulate. If they couldn't communicate, they were seen as savages, meaning if they didn't speak your language. Meaning, for example, when the English came here, the Native Americans couldn't speak English, they couldn't communicate ideas, they couldn't hear ideas, they couldn't give ideas, therefore they were savage, right? And so this is what I understand the word to mean. Now, the fact is that today, when people aren't able to communicate their ideas, when they haven't learned a decent vocabulary, just a halfway decent vocabulary, nor have they learned grammar, nor have they even learned rhetoric, then what, or I should have put that in reverse, no problem. But anyway, when they haven't learned the ability to speak well, then they start reducing themselves to animals, right? They start regressing back. Instead of progressing as human beings, they regress back to a state of their animalistic nature, and they start grunting. And what I mean by grunting is that they start dropping F-bombs. You have people who, they can't say a complete sentence without dropping an F-bomb in the middle of it. They use foul language, they use indecency. You can't, perhaps I ask you, oh, what do you think of so and so? And then immediately, not you, but in general, a person might start telling you all the negative things about them. We can't have conversations without backbiting people or making fun of people any longer. And so what happens is we're not able to communicate, and so we reduce ourselves to the foulest of language, the most base of language, these grunts and indecencies and foul language, because we don't know how to communicate. And it's really unfortunate. We see a society here where they're entertained. I was reading an article, and it was a really good article. I'm trying to remember. It was an article on breastfeeding, actually, and it was a really good article. And then towards the end, for whatever reason, this writer, journalist, decided to drop an F-bomb in the article. And I'm like, this didn't add anything to the article. It actually detracted my attention from the article. Why did they feel the need to do this? The reality is that they're trying to communicate with people on the level that the people are, and this is the level people are. They can't communicate ideas, so they regress back to grunting. And when I say grunting, I mean using language, calling people, bees and the like. This is a lack of ability. It displays a lack of ability to express oneself. And again, just to be very clear, what's the point of me saying all of this? Because our ability to communicate, our ability to use language is something that elevates us as human beings. And when we lose that skill, when that skill is stripped from us, and again, this is why the slaves were not allowed to read and write, because they understood that if they learned to read and write, that would elevate them in their humanity. And so keeping them as subhumans, they refused to allow them to be learning to read and write was punishable by death for a slave in some areas. And so
Mhm.
this is a way of controlling the population again. It goes back to keeping the society, keeping the citizens under the authority of those who take this power.
Yes. But sometimes I think, when I'm communicating with somebody who is older, who is a graduate, and I often get a kind of deliberate misunderstanding of what I'm trying to say, which I understand is a tactic. If you don't want to do something, you can pretend not to hear it,
Right.
or you deliberately misunderstand it so you can lower it in estimation, so you can dismiss it. And I think a lot of it is also to do with the inner psychology of a lot of people, which is, denial of some fact that you're trying to communicate. So if they don't hear what you're saying, if they don't obey the moral imperative, which is a philosophical term, which means it's sort of, well, if you want to think of yourself as honest and rational and moral, you have to do this thing. In a sense that, a father, the head of the family is obliged to protect his wife and children if they're under attack. And even if they really want to go run away, they somehow know they can't just walk away and leave their you know wife and children to be taken. It's
They
a sort of
should know that.
mm. But if they want to avoid having to act, they will pretend not to hear. And so
Right.
there's a lot of psychology involved as well. And a lot of communication methods being adopted by a lot of people, I find, is deliberately ambiguous because they're afraid. So they adopt the stratagem of ambiguity. So there is the recourse later to plausible deniability, so they can say, "Oh, I was only joking." You're a fool to not see the joke, or it had two layers of meaning, and you're too stupid to see the nuance, or whatever excuse they
Or they
want to
just simply
provide you.
say, "Oh, I didn't know that's what you meant." I didn't know that's what you meant. And so it's actually, I know a lot of people who are passive aggressive, and they'll use this very tactic of feigning ignorance, because they don't want a responsibility. Most of the time, they simply don't want to have to commit. They don't want to have to commit. And again, this goes back to people wanting to shed responsibility and basically rely on others instead of standing up on their own 2 feet, unfortunately.
So we have already this Tower of Babel that is about to collapse on us, and also the inner psychology of a lot of people who want to deny, the state of their country, the well, in a way, the lack of future if things are allowed to continue as they are. Um, and okay, this afternoon before we had the stream, I was being assailed by somebody saying, "What is a Muslim country?" And so you don't know what is a Muslim country, because I was saying a Muslim country can be a country that has Sharia, but you can also have a Muslim country that is just majority Muslim that doesn't practice Sharia. And I'm saying, well, there will be nuance, but because this is a question about secular Quranism, I suppose he was anticipating being called Muslim, which I think he may not like. And so a lot of concepts are problematic, and uh, but anyway. in a way was optimistic, and that people were anticipating, the future to come and asking questions about it. So I suppose, the best we can do is to keep the channels of communication open, so that perhaps some of the effort that we make is effective, or in some way inspirational, enough to get people to want to do something.
No, so there. So what I would say is that this I really enjoy the Socratic method, and that is that when we have a discussion, no matter what the discussion is, we could be talking about anything, as long as it's a serious discussion. Let me be very clear. I'm talking about having an actual in-depth discussion with somebody. If I'm going to be talking about let's say secular Quranism, then the very first thing that we have to is lay that foundation of defining our terms. What is it that we mean when we use this term? And so this is one of the problems, is people will listen to respond instead of listening to hear. And we have to know that the terms, when you say secular Quranism, I don't know what you mean, right? And so my estimation, and I've mentioned this to you, I've mentioned this to our sister Carol, and the like, and what I understand secular Quranism to be is basically what has traditionally been a dhimmi state, right? And what a dhimmi is an area, and so there's going to be problems here, but a dhimmi is an area that has agreed to a treaty with a Muslim nation, right? And so the dhimmi is a non-Muslim, and the dhimmi state is a non-Muslim state, but they pay taxes. They pay taxes. Their taxes go to an Islamic state, and the Islamic state will make sure that they have proper governance, justice, defense, all of these things, and it's governed according to the Sharia. And so when I hear secular Quranism, this is what I'm thinking, is that we're talking about a state that is
Yes.
is run according to the Sharia law, right?
Hmm.
But and the leadership is singular, meaning that it's centralized leadership. It's not 5, 10 people fighting against each other for leadership or the like. Rather, it's an appointed, if we could say that, leader over these people. They could vote for it, of course. And one of the things that traditionally, and this is also important, is that whenever there was a dhimmi state, the just Muslim governments would never say, okay, we're going to put this foreigner over you and you have to listen to this foreigner. Rather, what they would do is that they would say, who is your chief now? And then they would leave that person as their chief. Why? Because the leadership should come from a people, from their own people. And so the fact is that when I hear secular Quranism, this is really what I hear: a leader from amongst their own people, non-Muslims, if they're non-Muslims, and they run according, they judge according, they govern according to the Sharia, and the citizens themselves don't have to be Muslim. They don't have to have any faith, for that matter. This is this
Absolutely.
is this is what I hear.
Hmm. Hmm. It would be like America with the First Amendment. There are all these
Well,
laws that Americans are subject to, and they have freedom of belief and freedom of expression. And I want to use the American example because America is the exceptional and indispensable nation for propagating this idea that this was completely new until, because Europeans were kingdoms with absolute monarchs, and the subjects of these absolute monarchs had no freedom of belief at all, until the American Revolution.
and it's, I like that you gave that nuance of Europeans and Americans, because again, this, where what is the first constitution that we're aware of, right? And I'm not saying that this is the very first constitution ever, but I'm saying, what is the first government or state constitution that we have existing today, that we have remnants of? What's the first constitution ever written?
Um, do you mean the Ten Commandments?
No, no, the Ten Commandments isn't a constitution. The Ten Commandments is Ten Commandments, right? Actually, I'm talking about a state constitution.
The Medina Constitution?
That's the very first constitution, right? So the
Hmm.
very first pact or state constitution ever developed was by the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when he entered into this new state of Yathrib, which became the enlightened city, or Medina. And here in Medina, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, the first thing that he did is that he set up boundaries. What is the state, right? From what area to what area? And this is important, is that to establish borders, who is being governed and who is outside the realm of that governance. And then who are the citizens? The citizens, it doesn't matter what tribe you're from or what religion you're from. Anybody who lives within these borders is considered a citizen. And then what is the role of the citizen? The citizen has to stand up for justice. They have to, even if your brother is a criminal, you can't harbor that criminal in your house, or you can't hide that criminal from justice. You have to actually work towards justice for all of society. And what's more is, everybody, because you're living here, then you have a responsibility to defend your land. And if there's any disagreements between the people, then there's a central court. If you can't work it out amongst your tribe or your own family or your own people, then you have to go and accept the judgment of the central court. So these are just, snippets, of course. And so freedom of religion was established, the who is a citizen, what is the role of the citizen, the centralized court, all of this was established then, right? 1400 years ago, 1443 years ago, to be exact, this was established. And so it's the American model. We can point to even the secular, what can we say, the checks and balances. So you have of course the presidency, you have the Congress, you have the Supreme Court system. In Islam, you also had this divide in Islamic states, I should say, and that is, you would have the leadership, the sultan. And this is a mistake that a lot of people think, is that they think that Islamic states are theocracies. They're not. Islamic states, for the most part, are in a lot of ways, they're secular. And what I mean by that is that though they're governed according to the Sharia, though that's the law of the land, the Sultan is not the great Imam, right? He's not the great Imam, or the Amir, the governor is not the great Imam. He's not even necessarily the most knowledgeable of people. He rather surrounds himself with a council, with a shura, a council. We'll just leave it at that. And so he has this council that will advise him and help him. And so the Sultan is the political authority, right? He does the role of a governor or a president or the like. And then you have the scholarship, and the scholarship in this regard is, it serves like the Congress, where they're coming together and looking at what's going on in the land, and they're making decisions, and they're advising the leadership. And then you have the court system, which is independent of both of those other two, and it can make its own judgments. And so in this way, though they all work together, there are also checks and balances for one another. And so this American model that we point to, this was established again 1400 years ago by the Islamic State. This isn't something new to us. It's simply something new to us, right? So as people of European descent, as Americans, as Europeans, this concept is new, being introduced in this way, right? But this is something that it's been established. It's been established for over 1,000 years in the Islamic lands.
Yes, and I think it's fair to describe the Constitution as a book of rules. That anybody playing a particular game, i.e., living in a particular country, should understand. And obviously, the rules shouldn't be changing the whole time. And this, I think, is our complaint of the modern world, that we never know what the law is, and by the time we find out and get used to it, it will have changed again, and it's intolerable and insufferable. And I suppose, selling people a theocracy would be like saying to them, hey, if you're tired of the rules changing all the time, this would give you some stability. And then everybody would have people would feel a sense of tradition and not a sense of, perpetual alienation. And I think there are good practical points that could be sold to people, even if they don't believe in God.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the main things here is that, why did Americans, and we can say from, 1776, before that really, but, until, let's just say, the 1940s, 1950s, Why did Americans uphold the Constitution? Why did they love the Constitution? Why did they fight and die for this Constitution? What was the American ideal, that they got so behind it? And the fact is that they were actually experiencing something. They actually had, they felt as though their needs were being met. They felt as though they were being cared for. They felt as though they actually had freedom, that there was a reality to these claims. And now we don't feel that way. We feel betrayed. We feel, and post 9/11, the reality is post 9/11, America is not free any longer. We have the Patriot Act, we have the FBI and the CIA working on our soil. The CIA specifically works as joint task force with the police department in New York. I've actually heard cases where the New York City terrorist task force crossed state lines, went into Pennsylvania and interviewed somebody, and I'm like, because they're not police. That's actually the CIA working in accord with the New York City Police Department, and they do this. They make these task forces because it's generally illegal in our legal system for the CIA to operate on U.S. soil. So they join these task forces. The FBI has more leniency, but they'll still do these make task forces with local municipalities, local police stations, in order to give them more access to people. So we're more under a police state now than we have ever been, and they're trying to usurp more and more of our rights, more and more of our freedoms. Right now, we have what's called the Real ID Act, and the Real ID is now a national ID. So if you want to get on a plane, you have to have this. And if you don't have the Real ID, they can actually ban you from travel. What's more is that they can scan that, and they have all of your details on a scan now. And we could say, oh, that's progress. Yeah, it is progress. It's also kind of an infringement to where when you get pulled over by the police, they actually can pull up all of your information. And this is an infringement upon our rights to privacy. And along with that, you don't have an ID number, and a lot of people don't realize this because they don't look. But with the Real ID, you don't actually have an identification number anymore. Now you have a customer number, because the citizens are no longer seen as individuals with identification. Rather, now we're seen as customers to the state, right? We're a commodity to them. And so all of these things are happening, and we don't feel the same way. We don't have that feeling towards our nation, towards our government that the people of old had. And this is why people aren't willing to sacrifice, except the most, the people who they use patriotism as a part of their identity. And so, and I don't like to paint with such a broad brush, because there are exceptions. There's always exceptions to these things. But what I want to say, and this is why I brought all of this up, and this is why I've been saying all of this for like too long, but the fact is that the laws, the Constitution, none of that matters if the hearts aren't there, right? If the people don't believe that this is for them, if they don't believe that this is benefiting them, if they don't believe or feel that they're being cared for, if they're not empowered, right, then they won't get behind it. We if they don't have respect for the law, then they're not going to follow the law. Something as simple as speeding, red lights, something as simple as loud noises after 11 o'clock. If people have no respect, no self-respect, no respect for their neighbor, no respect for the system itself, then they look for every way they can to break these laws. And it doesn't matter what constitution, it doesn't matter what system of law, it doesn't matter the laws themselves. If people don't have a basic level of respect, self-respect, and respect for others, then they're not going to respect the legal system. The legal system can be there, but it's not going to. People are going to constantly seek ways to circumvent it, or just sit at home like they do now and complain about it while their life goes by while they're distracted.
I don't think what's happening in America now is even particularly new, because what you just said reminded me of what Confucius said, and about, well, you can make as many laws as you like, Emperor of China, but if they don't like you, they will circumvent you, all the laws. But if they respect you and thought you cared about them, they would love you, and they would just instinctively not do anything to upset you and try to do things to please you.
No, absolutely. And this again, I was talking to someone about this in the class last night, and the fact is that the early Muslims, they didn't see Islam as many people see it today, as legalistic. They obeyed the laws, they obeyed the commands because they understood that there was benefit for them. It was for them, it wasn't against them. And they had a love for God, and they had a love for the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. They yearned for God, and they had an expectation of the last day. And because of that, they changed their behavior. Men who used to be alcoholics dumped their drinks out and didn't drink. Women who used to walk around with their breasts exposed went and ripped their curtains down to cover their bodies properly. And so people changed themselves. They changed from inside. And this is the point that I'm really making here, is that the laws are external. People have to change. People have to want to transform from inside. And in order to do that, they have to have some actual real motivation. And I think that people see theocracy as a just another. Again, this is one of those neutral words that have a negative connotation in our language today. But they see it as just another despot ruler being imposed upon them, and so they rebel. And this is unfortunate. And again, just to summarize that, this is why the laws are important. The Constitution is important, but what's most important is the hearts and minds of people.
Yes, and I think also the fact that people can see that a particular law is fair enough or ought to exist, because I'm sure most people, if you talk to them and they're being rational and honest, would agree that there should be laws against murder, theft, sexual immorality, all those kinds of things. And I think that they would respect those laws if they felt it was being enforced fairly and consistently. And so how it's imposed and enforced will have an effect on how they perceive the law to be. And unfortunately, just because of the way things have been for so long, citizens of the West have lost faith in their own government. And I think a lot of it is to do with the operation of democracy, which is actually the problem that the Quran has warned us against. Do not divide your religion into sects and rejoice
The
in your own doctrines.
America, and this is one of the biggest thing. Most Americans think that America is a democracy, but America is not a democracy. It's never been a democracy. America is a democratic republic. And what that means is that a party that determines who they want to represent them, and then they allow the people to choose from among, or they make the facade in reality, but that's a whole nother matter. That they allow the people to choose who they chose. Do you want to choose the person that we chose, or do you want to choose the person that they chose, right? And so it's not a true democracy at all. It's more it really isn't a democracy. And not only, I read what you had sent me earlier about George Washington being against multiple party states, and the conflict between, I believe it was Jefferson and no, it was Andrew Jackson, and yeah, I believe it was Jackson and Jefferson. I could be mistaken, but anyway, the point being is that it was Alexander Hamilton and Jackson. So this difference of opinion between them, and George Washington saw how this could cause this corruption. And this is what we see today. I tell people all the time, when people ask me, because there's a conflict in Islam, should we vote? Should we not vote? Is voting against Islam? Is it, all of these things. And I tell them, I said, don't bother yourself with national politics. I tell people this all the time. If you buy into the facade, then you're simply perpetuating a lie, right? Local politics is another matter. But national politics is football, right? Or soccer, or whatever else sport a person wants to be. Whose team are you representing? Whose quarterback are you cheering on? And really that's what it comes down to. You have people that will argue something that they're for, they'll argue against it simply because the other party has put it forward. And so they're pro this team. Oh, I'm Republican. Oh, I'm Democrat. Oh, I'm Green Party, or I'm independent. And so they'll actually root. They'll put up signs and wear shirts and put bumper stickers on their car to encourage their team. My team's the winning team. And really all it is sports, right? It's entertainment. This is just another form of entertainment, and it's another way people stop thinking for themselves. I don't get into national politics generally, and the fact is that even local politics, I don't care about parties. I don't care about what is the issue. Let's look at the issue. Let's see where we stand on the issue, and let's go for that. If they're for this, we're for that. If they're against that, we're against that. And I don't care if they're a Democrat or Republican or anything else. What are they saying? What are they actually standing for? And that's
Mhm.
going to determine whether or not they have any support from me at all. And this is how I encourage other people to be too. Don't look at parties. Don't look at what team they're on. Look at what they're standing for.
But don't you think the reason why we are where we are now is because of the operation of democracy? Because this fighting for election means that both parties will always be going cap in hand to their corporate donors, and this being so, when they get elected, there will be payback time when obviously the party who won as a result of the donation of whoever, whatever their corporate sponsors are, will have to do what these corporate sponsors want them to do. And so what you have then is that you get the merchant class controlling American politics, which is crazy because, under the Hindu caste system, there would be, the priesthood, the warrior class, and then you get the merchant class, and then you get the laboring classes, and then you get the untouchables. But in the Western nations, because of the crazy way they elect their leaders, you do get the business classes actually telling our politicians what to do. And they won't
So
admit it. I've been saying, China would never allow that because there's no corporate China telling the Communist Party what to do. Because any, billionaire that gets too big for his boots will be told off by the Chinese Communist Party, and they go quiet for a bit, and then they emerge, chastened and a lot, quieter. Well, at least the CCP are aware of what could happen if things get out of hand. But isn't it the case that corporate America is really the one controlling, everything, but, because they have the means to bribe politicians.
Well, to answer that question, and this becomes problematic. This goes down a path where we get into conspiracy type stuff, and so I want to be careful and cautious with what I say, and I want to make sure that anything that I say is defendable. So I'll take this, and I want to start by talking foreign first. I don't know China, and so I can't speak to China, and I really don't know Russia very well either. But I know Russia is also communist, and we know that the government itself is supported by the oligarchs. So those people that are exceptionally wealthy, they basically support the government, and until they oppose the government, right? Until they oppose the government, they're actually supported, and so it's a hand in hand thing, even if we don't see it in other countries, communist countries as well. And so this corporate backing of leadership, it's not something unique to the United States, is basically what I'm saying, or capitalist countries for that matter. Having said that, I'll say that there's a lot of reasons why America is in the state that it's in now, and I don't honestly think that it's just corporate America leading the politicians by their pockets. A lot of it has to do, honestly, with the breakdown of family. The breakdown of family itself is the biggest problem in America. So, I mean, that's a good place to start. But as rather than looking at the root cause, which is the breakdown of family, we can look at a bigger picture, and even corporate America, the lobbyists supporting politicians, paying politicians, and they try to make moves, they try to make laws to prevent this, and they just find ways to circumvent the laws, as we've seen in the last election. And other than that, so there's a reality to the lobbyists paying politicians, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and the like. And we see laws being passed, we see pipelines being shut down, and all of these things as ways of working with the corporations. But the fact of the matter is, and this is where I'm going down the conspiracy trail. The fact of the matter is that America is over $20 trillion. If I'm not mistaken, we're well over $22 trillion right now in debt. And there's, I forget the interest rate. It's something. It's astronomical, millions and millions. If I'm not mistaken, hundreds of millions of dollars every day in interest. Every day in interest is being accrued on that debt. What that means is that America is never going to be free of that debt. And who do we owe? We owe the Federal Reserve. And a lot of people, they hear federal and they think that it's part of our federal government. They think that it's part of our government system, but it's not. It's an independent banking conglomerate. And so every time we use currency, we're using their currency. They make the currency and our government buys it from them, and that puts us further in debt. And so what this basically means is, and I'll put it this way, is America is the whore of their pimp, and their pimp is the banking system. And so America can't make it on their own. And we're so far in debt right now that we can't get out of debt. Again, the American people themselves, our leadership, yes, but even the American people are the commodity. We are the collateral on that debt and the land. And we saw in Greece when they went bankrupt, one of the first things that started happening was these islands started to be sold off. And so our land is part of the commodity. And so we find international corporations buying up American land, and we don't hear about it. But every now and then you get a glimpse of it. Oh, they bought this, 1,000 acres in Nebraska or something like this. The fact of the matter is our land and our people are the collateral on this debt that will never be paid off. Now, what that means is that whatever the banking system, the world banking system wants done, America is now going to do it. When I'll give you the example of Libya, Gaddafi was not in control of Libya. He had no authority in Libya whatsoever, but we made him the enemy. Why did we make him the enemy? Libya actually it was a true democracy. It was actually a true democracy from the lowest level of neighborhood leadership to national leadership. And Gaddafi was not a leader at all. He did not have a position in the government at that for decades, actually. But anyway, what he did do is that he was putting forth a proposal for a gold-backed unified currency for Africa, for all of African nations. And what that would have done is that means that all of the African nations, the poorest of the African nations, would have paid off their debt to the international banking systems within 5 to 10 years. And then 5 to 10 years after that, Africa would have been the richest continent, the most wealthy economical continent on the earth. And so what happened is that the bankers these nations are in debt, which means they're servants to these bankers, right? So if you're threatening to free them, then you have to be eliminated. So what did America do? America went over and we sent in agents that caused disruption, that we called it the Arab Spring, but we know for sure, and there's no doubt that America was behind this. And we have example after example of America being used by the international banking conglomerates to go around and enforce debt. Oh, you can't pay your debt? Well, we'll disrupt your whole country. And that's how they collect on their debt. That's how the bankers collect on their debt. When a nation is no longer able to pay their debt and there's no benefit in leaving them to that debt, then they collect. How do they collect? They go into a place like Iraq and they have a war, they destroy that nation, and then they send these international corporations in to rebuild the state. And that funnels that money back to the banks. And this is how the banks get, and what's more is that they take literally take this land, set up puppet governments and the like. And so America right now is a puppet. It is like I said, it's a prostitute for the pimp that is the Federal Reserve. And that's really the biggest problem. Our
Could
leadership,
it be nationalized?
the bank,
The Federal Reserve, could it be nationalized?
the only way to nationalize it is, and I'll tell you, America does have the strongest military in the world. It's a sad state of affairs that we spend so much on our military. If I'm not mistaken, we still spend more than the next 5 countries put together on our military. But the only way that we can nationalize the or the Federal Reserve rather, is by pulling all of our troops back to our borders, back to our land from all over the world, and saying we're not in debt anymore. We cancel that debt. Get out of our country. Don't come at us. And if you come at us to collect this debt, we're ready to defend ourselves. If America was so bold to cancel that debt on the Federal Reserve and say you're just not getting it, right? Then they can nationalize a centralized bank, which is what all of the founding fathers said. They said, do not establish a centralized banking system wherein we take loans from other nations, because then we become debt servants to those nations. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly the founding fathers for the first 100 years. They were absolutely against a centralized banking system or taking loans from international banking conglomerates. And I believe it was in the time of Woodrow Wilson, but I could be mistaken. But anyway, finally America did this, and ever since we've been in debt. Ever since that time where we got into bed with the Federal Reserve, ever since that moment, our nation has declined steadily, right? Steadily declined. And I personally believe in metaphysical realities, and I believe there are metaphysical causes behind this. But the fact of the matter is, even outwardly, we see that the only way to nationalize our financial situation, our money, is by uh, challenging challenging the international banking conglomerate. The problem is that if America was so bold to do that, then all the other nations, you have to understand, Germany, France, England, they're all debtors. They're all indebted to these same
Mm.
bankers, and so their forces will turn on America. This is how nation again. This is how the bankers uh, claim their money, is that they use one nation to fight against another nation. This is, if
Well, you could default on your debt all at the same time.
well, this is the thing, is that defaulting, if what you mean is saying that we're not going to pay you, right? If that's
That's
what
what
you
you said, right?
You're
I was
right,
going,
that's what
yeah.
I'm saying. But
Hmm.
oh, you mean all the nations do that?
At
You
the
mean
same
all?
time. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, that would be a wonderful thing to see in this world. I don't see that happening, but that
Well,
would be
I
a
mean,
wonderful thing.
but why wouldn't it happen? All of the Western nations are already indebted. So if you
Hmm.
defaulted on at the same time, but obviously you would have to say, well, we renounce usury and we're going to practice Islamic, principles of finance. We've learned our mistake. We're all going to do it at the same time because that's the only way it's going to work if we do it all at the same time, and taking the lead from America.
Well, you know, that's if you got Europeans to do that, like European nations, then you would find nations like China being used. So what I understand today is that there's only maybe three. So Syria, Libya, Sudan, North Korea, Iran, and there's a couple others. There's two others. These seven nations in 2000, and just say in the year 2000, these seven nations were the only seven nations on the face of the planet that was not indebted to international banking conglomerates. And what we've seen since then is almost every single one of these have seen wars and uprisings that cause them to take international debt in order to free themselves of this. And so right now, I believe North Korea and Iran, and I could be mistaken, they're the only two nations on the entire planet that is not in debt to international banking conglomerates. There might be one more that I'm forgetting about or something like this. So
Mhm.
basically, what I'm saying is that even if America and Europe did this, then they would be the axis of evil, and the other nations would then be raised up and publicized as the good guys who are fighting, the allies who are fighting against the axis of evil, because we would be villainized. There would be some reason to attack us, and these other nations would be used as pawns to collect the debt of the debtor of the bankers.
So who is the biggest creditor nation? Is it China?
The what do you mean? The one that owns the most debt of the United States?
That's China, isn't it? I mean,
I believe it is. I believe it is.
but China's not up to challenging America. It's.
Well, I and these are we're starting to step out of my realm of knowledge, to be honest with you. But what I would say is that I personally believe, it's my belief, and I could be right or wrong. This is not my area of expertise at all. But I believe that there was backdoor agreements between China and Russia. Russia doesn't want to fight Ukraine. Russia wants to fight America. And the fact is that, I believe that Russia did this in order to cause America to do something that would trigger a war, a direct war between Russia and America. And America, out of some wisdom, they did not allow themselves to be the face of NATO. Rather, they let the French and the Germans do that. And so even when NATO stood against Russia, it wasn't America, it was NATO led by the French and the Germans. So Russia didn't have an opportunity, if you will, to trigger a broader war. Now, if they would have rolled over the Ukraine like their plan was, I believe, and China had already moved troops towards Taiwan. I believe that if Russia would have defeated Ukraine swiftly and America would have interfered, China would have invaded Taiwan, which again breaks a treaty with the United States. That we not breaks a treaty, but we have to defend Taiwan as a nation. And so this would have caused China and Russia together to be allied against the United States. And we might not be able to defeat one of these countries might not be able to defeat America, but together with their allies, they might actually stand a fighting chance. And this is, again, one of the interesting things here, and people don't pay attention to this, is that one of the reasons that many of these nations do not enter into the United States, they don't try to invade the United States, it's not because of our military, it's because of our citizenry, because we have more guns in our neighborhoods than we have people in our neighborhoods. And that's a good thing, because it keeps people are aware that if we invade, we're not just fighting a military, we're fighting the citizens who are armed. And this causes people to think twice before they try to invade our nation. Now, if they take our guns from us, if they take the American guns from us, they've taken the American citizens' ability to defend our own nation against our government, against one another, criminals, and against foreign powers. And so what this means is that if they take our guns from us, we're one step closer to the international bankers collecting on their debt. Whether they could take California, but whether they take California or some other part of our nation, and then the people would not have an ability to defend our nation, because we would no longer be an armed citizenry. And the whole Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, was all about having an able-bodied militia that's ready to defend our own people against a tyrannical government. And we have to remember that.
I just can't see the Chinese want to, even dreaming of invading America. I mean, do you really think that's?
I I don't do international affairs. It's not my specialty.
Okay.
But what I
Okay. Well,
understand is that there. Of course, we know that there's an animosity between China and America. We Vietnam was between China and America. The Cold Wars are between capitalism and communism. And so China is a communist power. It's a superpower. Even there's wars going on in Africa right now. We don't hear about them, but China is going. America is sending military into Africa, while China is opening businesses in Africa rather, trying to influence it through financial. So we're actually right now, China and America are having this Cold War. It's not of bullets necessarily. Sometimes it does get there, but we're having this Cold War over Africa. Who's going to have the power over Africa, which is itself sad. But so even to this day, there's a lot of competition between these two governments.
I think China sort of go to Africa and offer to build infrastructure and maybe get them indebted and use a few of their
Well,
ports or something like that.
yeah,
I
no,
think,
of
but
course,
but but
and
I
that
get the impression that the Western countries kind of Britain calls it foreign aid. So they give India foreign aid, but
yeah.
really it's a bribe for them to buy British, fighter jets and
And that's what
army.
I was going to say, is that, colonialism is colonialism, no matter the tactics being used. So China is simply colonizing different parts of Africa. They're not using their military to do it, but they're certainly using purse strings, just like other nations have done in the past for other, you used India as an example. America is still doing this, we give aid to certain nations if they cooperate, and we put sanctions on nations if they don't cooperate. It's the same thing, and China is no different than any other nation like this.
The Quran has a few principles about warfare as well as international relations, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, the Sharia as a legal, it's a system of systems, and so you have family law, you have civic law, you have criminal law, you have state law, and you have international law.
And if most countries in the world followed this model, I mean, wouldn't the world be a more peaceful and less warlike place? Because I mean, isn't there this idea that only defensive laws are allowed, and if you want imperial wars, you have to win it, and if you don't win it, it's too bad. And obviously, the waging of imperial wars is a different kind of thing to waging a defensive war.
I I the example that I would give is Palestine, right? And so Palestine, under the so when Palestine was first opened in the 8th century, 7th century, 8th century, under Omar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he opened Palestine, the very first thing that he did is that he permitted Jews, because the Christians had forbade Jews to enter into Jerusalem. He permitted Jews to make pilgrimage, so they could go there to the Wailing Wall. They could go to their holy sites, but they couldn't buy land. Why couldn't they buy land? Because this was part of the treaty. The Christians would not allow it, and so the Muslims said, "Okay, we'll agree to this." Now, what happened is that during the Crusades, which we spoke about, being triggered by finances, not actual faith. But when the Christians massacred the Muslims and took over this area, what actually they forbade anybody who was not Christian to enter into these lands. So there was no more room for pilgrimages outside of Christians. When Salahuddin reopened Jerusalem, what he did is, or Palestine, because it wasn't just Jerusalem, it was greater Palestine. But when he reopened this, what he did is he said, no, it's complete religious freedom. Whether you're Jew, Muslim, Christian, you can come here, you can visit your holy sites, you can buy land, you can move, all of these things. And so for 400 years or so, there was peace in that land. Now, what I want to say is that I'm not making the claim that this group or that group didn't feel oppressed, or this group or that group didn't have complaints or something like that. There's always going to be somebody who feels that they're getting the short end of the stick. But the fact of the matter is that there was justice and there was peace throughout this greater Palestine at that time for 400 years under the Sharia. And the Jews were treated fairly, and the Christians were treated fairly, and the Muslims were treated fairly, and they all interacted. So much so that you had Christians who would do parades, if you will, during their holy periods, carrying crosses down the streets of Muslim neighborhoods, and no one was harmed because this was the law. They were permitted to do this under the Sharia. Their institutions were protected, their schools were protected, their places of worship were protected, their humanity was protected. And then what happened is that the British came. And when the British came, one of the first things that the British did, and this is the tactic of the West, is that they divide and conquer. And so they said, oh, no, they're doing this and they're treating you unfairly. Oh, look, they get to do this. And so these types of things. And so they divided the groups, and you started to see conflict between them. And not only that, but they would divide neighborhoods. Oh, the Christians have to stay there. You're not permitted here without permission. And so they restricted movement. Now, what happens, of course, and we'll get into this, I don't want to get into too much detail, when the Zionist movement began at the end of the 19th century, and they decided that they were going to take Palestine for themselves, the Zionists, not Jews. We have to understand that all Zionists are not Jews, and all Jews are not Zionists. So when the Zionists moved into Palestine, they took it over for themselves, and they began to oppress the indigenous Palestinian people, both Jews, Muslims, and Christians. and that's something to. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because for 400 years they lived in peace under the Sharia, right? It's
Mhm.
only when they were divided amongst themselves that we see conflict starting again.
Yes, I believe that the First World War started because weren't the Serbians under the Ottoman Empire or something, and then they weren't happy with the Austrians, and then that was the led to the assassination of the
The
Archduke.
Austrian prince, right? Yeah, yeah.
I,
So he,
I'm not sure actually, but maybe
yeah,
you could
no,
confirm.
and that's it started with the Austrian, the assassination of the Austrian, the shot heard around the world, right?
Mhm.
But I don't know that and see, this is the thing, is that I don't know that had religious connotation. I Religion is so often used as a means of pulling people's emotional strings, but that doesn't mean that the conflict is actually religious in nature. And I think that that's a prime example of that.
Well, I suppose, you can do this broad brush approach and say, well, the First and Second World War was started and fought by Christians. And, nobody can really deny that because Christianity is the religion of the West. So nobody's going to, say it wasn't started or fought by Christians, even if they say, well, it's for political reasons or whatever. And, if there is a Third World War, between Russia and America, that it would still be fought by Christians, started and fought by Christians. So um, um, maybe there is something inherently problematic about Christianity because it really doesn't have the guidance that is needed to solve all these problems. It has no instructions about international relations and governance because it never got that far. I mean, Paul never got that far, did he? To
Well,
have
in
any
the
good
very
advice.
beginning, the problem when we talk about Christianity, and I'll compare talking about Christianity to talking about white people, right? I'll compare the two, and it's relevant, and that is that we say white people, as an example, and we'll say white culture, and we'll say, the things of this nature, and two, we'll say Christians. The reality is that there's no such thing as white people. If we're going to say white people, the only true people that could be considered white people, if you will, are white Americans, such as myself, right? Why? Because we're so divorced from any kind of heritage that the only thing that we are is white Americans, right? Um, Other people in Europe, for example, you're English. One person is German, one person is French, one person is Norwegian. So they have their own heritage, their own ethnicity, their own ancestral background, biological ancestry, and the like. That so they're not white people. They're German, and they're French, and they're English, and they're Scandinavian, and they're Serbian. And so the fact is that this global, whiteness isn't a thing. Whiteness isn't a thing. It's not a unifier. It's not really a unifier unless it's being misused. So the same way with Christianity, when we say Christianity, we have to understand that there is the Eastern Orthodox Church. And even in the Eastern Orthodox Church, you have a separation between the Russian Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox and the like. And then you have the Roman Orthodoxy or the Catholic Church. And then you have the Protestants. And then the Protestants break down. So my point being is that there's not a homogenous whole to say the Christians are this or the Christians are that. What I would say, and this goes all the way back to the beginning, and this is why I brought it up, is because, Peter and Paul had their own conflicts. They didn't get along. They didn't agree on certain things. He understood Jesus he was a prophet and a messenger sent by God to the Jewish people to uphold the Jewish laws. That's how Peter understood it, and that's how Peter practiced it. He did capitulate sometimes with Paul. They did agree and allow Paul to go to the Gentiles, but Paul believed that Jesus's mission was to all people. And this isn't the understanding of the early disciples. This is why Peter became what we call, what's considered today, many people call him the first pope of the church, while Paul died in a prison cell. As far as we know, he spent his last years in a prison cell. So the fact is that there, even in the earliest days of the church, there's a disagreement between who is a Christian and what is Christianity. And so we have to take that into account, as well as that when we say the Christians did this or the Christians did that, um, we have to be cautious. And one of the things that I will say is that just because a Christian does something, it's like a Muslim, commits an act of terrorism, right? Just as an example, and I use that example because this is where people's mind goes sometimes. A Muslim commits an act of terrorism. We don't say, look at the Muslims, right? We say this Muslim committed an act of terrorism. The same way with starting a war, we don't say the Christians did this, but we rather say this group of people did this evil deed, and they happen to be Christian as well. It's not that the fact that they're Christian, or it's not for Christianity, or it's not in the name of Christianity that they did these injustices. So these world wars, although of course they were perpetrated, we can even say they were began by Christian peoples. It's not, they didn't do it for Christianity. It wasn't like they was fomenting a Christian war. Both of these wars, specifically the two world wars, they were fought for secular reasons, and most of the wars in the last 1,000 years, in the last 100 years, rather, the last century, have all been secular in nature, even though it's been Christians fighting those wars. For the most part, they are still secular in nature, or we could say they're still, secular is fine.
Well, I mean, you were the one who said that the Crusades were not really fought for religious reasons. It was,
Exactly, absolutely.
um, but I suppose you could equate that to, tribes fighting their tribal wars
Hmm.
because they are competing for territory and resources, and they would consider, well, I mean, the winning tribe would think, oh, well, our gods are, favored us, and our god won over their god, and some sort of correlation would have been, made about their, the quality
No,
of their religion, or whatever it is.
and this is one of the wisdoms found in Islamic teachings, is that first I'll go to a prophetic narration where a man said, is the one who fights for his people, is he fighting in the way of God? Is the one who is fighting for himself fighting in the way of God? Is the one who is fighting to show that he's courageous, is he fighting for the in the way of God? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said none of these people are fighting in the way of God. Al Kama call it. He said what means, rather, the one who is fighting in the way of God is the one who is fighting that the guidance of God be experienced by people. And that's a paraphrasing translation, but that's what it means, is that the only person that's really fighting in the way of God is the one who is fighting so that the guidance of God can be experienced by humanity. And so again, we can fight defensive wars, but again, Muslim nations have historically fought even to defend non-Muslims, such as the Jews, such as Christian nations and the like, in order that that the oppression stop for them. That's the only way that we could say that a person is fighting for a religion or something like that. The other thing is that there was a concept in the beginning that, war is, one day it's for them, one day it's for us, one day it's for them, one day it's for us. And so war comes, the victory comes and goes. And you can't point to any nation or any people or any religious people specifically and say, look, they've never lost a war, right? Even America. You can't look at America and say, look, they've never lost a war. No, every people eventually lose. And so it's more indicative of the state of affairs of the people than it is their religion or their background or anything like that. And so there's this wisdom that we don't attribute war to our religion, nor do we attribute victory or loss to ours or somebody else's religion.
Well, I suppose, okay, the narrative I am seeking to promote is simply this, that Islam has a book, a holy book, whose rules are clear and easy to understand, while Christians make it up as they go along.
Mhm.
And when Constantine the Great decided that his Roman imperial cult was failing and he had better adopt a better religion. Only Christianity was around at the time, and he tried to prepare it in order to make it fit to become the Roman imperial religion, by calling the Council of Nicaea so the bishops at least could agree on a doctrine, but they couldn't really, and there was all this, toing and froing between Arianism and Trinitarianism. But I'm putting it to you that if Constantine the Great was looking for a religion and Islam had been around at the time, do you think he would have used Christianity?
I think that he would have still used Christianity, and the reason is because first and foremost, the Roman Empire was being divided at that time. It was actually collapsing and it was separating. And so what he did is he used Christianity as a unifier. And the way that he was able to do that was by manipulating Christianity, because part of Christianity, the doctrine of Christianity, again, is give unto God what is God, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And so the government itself keeps all rules. The only thing that the religion does, the only thing that the religion focuses on is one dimension of a person's life, and that is their inner state, right? And so your spirituality, your character, your manners, this is what Christianity really governs. And then as far as governance, the politics, then it can be this way, it can be that, however a person wants to play with it. And this is what the Constantine did, and this is what we see in the Roman Empire. Now, what's more is that he's able to manipulate even that by pointing to Paul and say, look how he took this to the Gentiles. We're also taking it to the Gentiles. And so what's the holiest day in the Christian calendar? What's the holiest, the highest holy day in the Christian calendar?
Easter.
Easter. What is Easter? Easter is the name of a pagan goddess. She is the goddess of fertility. She is the goddess of springtime, renewal. And how did the pagans used to celebrate her? What were the symbols? The symbols were rabbits and eggs. And how did they celebrate? They would take off their old clothes. It's the winter. Now they're going to put on shiny, beautiful, colorful clothes, new clothes, and go out into the fields. And this was a pagan practice. Now you find in Christianity, they have this holy day named after a pagan goddess of rebirth, right? And what is Easter celebrating? The alleged rebirth of Jesus. Peace and blessings be upon him. And so you have the theme of rebirth still there. You have the symbol of the rabbit and the egg still there. You have the donning of new clothes where Christians will go out and they get their Easter best. And most of the time, these are very colorful pastel clothes and the like, at least here in America. And so the Christians are literally taking the pagan practices, the pagan beliefs, the pagan holidays, and putting Christian themes on them. And this is what the Christian church did, is that when they would go to an area, they would see what the people were doing and they would Christianize it. Another example of this is All Saints Day. I believe it's All Saints Day, which is All Hallows Eve, which is Halloween, right? And they tried to do this with Halloween. It simply didn't stick. But my point is that they would go into areas and they would Christianize or try to Christianize the pagans by letting them continue in their paganism, but making it seem like it was Christian themed. And so we have the remnants of this. And that's why they could not do this. They would not be able to do this because Constantine wasn't sincere. Constantine wasn't being, he wanted power. It was about authority with him. And he wanted to unify his control of the state, the Roman Empire. He wanted to bring it back, and he wanted to spread it once more. And this is exactly what he did. He would not have been able to do that with Islam. But why? Because he couldn't manipulate Islam in this way. We have set celebrations. We don't involve ourselves in paganism at all. And the law of the land is going to be religious. I don't even like to say religious in nature, but it's going to be revealed law. It's not going to be whatever Caesar wants, And so he would not have been able to do the same exact thing with Christianity that he was able to do with Christian. He would not have been able to do the same thing with Islam that he was able to do with Christianity.
Yes, because the New Testament is very vague, and it's not even from God. So he could put his own interpretation of Christian laws, and the bargain he made with the subjects was, shut up about, any laws you don't like, just pray to God, believe that Jesus is God, and you will get to heaven. But the point is, I suppose, that it didn't really stop the Roman Empire from falling.
No, it didn't. It didn't. But what it did do is it allowed the Roman Church to spread. And and as it spread, you find more, what can we say, I would use the word corruption, and that's perhaps my own bias, but you find more corruption as it spreads into more pagan lands and the like. And one of the interesting things, going back to Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, is that they invited who they wanted to invite, and anybody who was a naysayer, anybody who actually disagreed, was considered a heretic. And
Hmm.
even wars were waged against these people. Some of these people were arrested, some of these people were killed, and the like, for disagreeing with the conclusion of the Nicene Council. And so
Hmm.
we see that he not only took control, he not only usurped the Christianity for his own cause, but he also redefined Christianity for everyone, and basically imposing his will, his idea of Christianity, what he wanted Christianity to be, upon other people.
Yes. So I guess Jehovah's Witnesses would be the modern day Arians, and but the most powerful churches, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Orthodox Church, are Trinitarians, and they have, spread considerably. And I suppose I mean, we could ask ourselves, if Christianity is indeed idolatry and blasphemy, why did God allow the spread of it to, to such a global extent? And I would just like to suggest that maybe, if Christians could acknowledge that what they are supposed to believe in is in fact nonsense, that they could actually sort of repent and adopt the better religion with its better book of rules without too much war or violence, if they could be persuaded to, of course. Because
Uh,
the thing about a global empire is that you have these communications, easy communication, easy transport, easy spread of ideas, and things could be easily replaced. And ideas
so
could.
one of the interesting things here is that, that same argument could be made for Hinduism, and why I say that is because today, I mean, in the 60s and 70s, one of the greatest gurus of Hinduism, one of the greatest speakers about this religion, was a Jewish man, right? A Jewish American, and that's Ram Dass, you know. And so we see the spread of Hinduism even today. Hinduism has spread all over, and people will say, "No, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual." And 90% of what they're saying, when you say, "Well, what do you mean?" They start naming Hindu practices or Hindu beliefs, and they don't even realize it. And so this is due to communication. And the fact is that the communication and the trade and the transfer of ideas is what allows for that global spread of these different faiths. Except for Christianity, Christianity is the only religion that I'm aware of that actually literally spread by the sword, that they actually forced their religion on other people through military might. And and this happened all the way up until till the last century, 2 centuries ago, the 19th century. So for people to, and one, if one asks, well, why did God allow Christianity to persevere and continue and all of this? The reality is that there was still remnants of truth, even at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. There were monks in Syria, in Greater Syria, and so we call this Balad al-Sham. What in English it's the Levant, right? And so there were these monks and these what do you call them? Yeah, the monks. We'll just leave it at monks, hermits, and the like, who they had remnants of oral traditions from the Christians that told them prophecies of the prophet to come. And so even we'll go to a man named Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian. His father was a Zoroastrian. He was the keeper of the flame. So they had the eternal flame that they worshipped, and his father was the priest that kept it alive. And when he was born, he's born into this caste. That would have been his role. And that's pretty much the most powerful role you can have in society, is keeper of the flame. What he said, he speaks on behalf of God and the like. But as a young boy, and this story is going to take a couple of minutes, but it's an important story. And so as a young boy, his father sent him to the market for something. You meaning, like, when I say young boy, I mean 7, 8, 9, something like this. His father sent him to the market, and he had heard some chanting from a building. So he went to check it out, and he was listening, and they were singing hymns and the like. And he asked them, well, what is this you're singing about? It caught his attention. It attracted him, and he found out about. They told him about Christianity, and so he asked about it, and they taught him, and he believed in it. And when he went home, his father said, well, what took you so long? And he told his father what had happened. His father punished him, told him that you're not allowed to leave the house until these people leave the town, right? So basically put his son under house arrest to protect him. Salman sent a message to the Christian caravan and said, look, this happened to me, but I now believe in your faith. When you leave, send word to me and I'll join you. So before they left town, they sent a note to him saying that, they were leaving. He escaped his father's house. He went and joined the caravan. He left. They went towards Turkey, towards modern day Turkey. And there he met this bishop, and he started living with and studying under this bishop of the church. This bishop used to take people's money. He would take the alms and the like, and he would put it in clay pots, and he would bury it in his room. He was a wicked person who usurped the money of people, and he would preach one thing and he would do something else. And Salman witnessed this, but he's in a situation where he can't do anything. He's actually not able to do anything because he's a child, and he's not a native. He's not part of that tribe. He's not part of that people. He's a
Mhm.
foreigner in a foreign land. So
Mhm.
he keeps his mouth shut, and this bishop, he dies. And Salman, who is his student, his pupil, he takes on the role, and he tells the people what had happened, and they're about to beat him. They say, how dare you speak ill of him? We loved him. He was such a good person, and he took care of you. He took you in, and now you're besmirching his name. And so Salman said, come, I'll show you. And he showed them, and he gave them the money back. And so he was given, they honored him, they gave him that position until the new bishop came. And when the new bishop came, he was a righteous person. Salman said, I didn't know anyone more righteous than this bishop except the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So Salman, he studied under him for years. And then when that bishop died, when he was dying, Salman said, is there anyone else who is teaching what you're teaching, the way that you're teaching it? This faith of ours, is there anybody that's teaching it the way you're teaching it? And he said, I don't know anybody except for so and so. So go to his land. And it was towards Palestine. So Salman packed up his stuff, and he went on this journey. Once the bishop died, he went on this journey. He met that bishop, and he stayed with him, studying under him until he died. And when he died, he asked him the same thing. That bishop said, I only know one person. He's here. Salman traveled there. He stayed with that guy until he was about to die. And Salman asked him, and this is where, we get to the point here. Salman asked him, is there anybody that's on what we're upon? Is there any Christians that are teaching the way that you're teaching? And this bishop, or this teacher, he said to him, he said, there's nobody. I don't know anybody anymore. I don't know anybody on the face of the earth that's teaching this truth any longer. But I believe that it's the time for the new prophet. And so go to the land of the date palms, right? And look for the man who he does not eat from charity, but rather he gives it out. But he does eat from and share gifts. And he has the mark of prophecy upon his back. Right. So this Christian bishop told Salman about these signs to look for the prophet to come. Where did this come from? Is this from a book? Right? No, this is from the oral traditions, maybe a scroll here or there. And that's one of the things that we have to understand, is that they had oral tradition that they passed down, and they also have scrolls that are not, they were considered apocryphal, or they were destroyed or hidden, or whatever the case might be. They had true teachings, and they had true teachers. And there were people amongst the Christians who had the true faith, and they propagated the true faith. And so I believe that this is why these people were preserved. Right? Now, Salman actually found the caravan going towards the Arab land, which is the land of the date palms, and he asked if he could join. He paid them the fee, and then along the way they took him as a prisoner. They took him to Yathrib, what became Medina today. They took him to the city, and they sold him as a slave. Right, and so he's instantly sold into slavery, and he works there for several years. And one day he's working in a tree, and he's actually owned by a Jewish man. And another Jew comes into the courtyard, and he says, have you heard about this man claiming to be a prophet? Salman said, what? He comes down from the tree. He's, grabbing dates. He comes down. He said, there's a man claiming to be a prophet in these lands. And his owner beats him and be like, this is no concern of yours. Mind your own business. Get back to work. So Salman, after he gets off work, he goes home, he gets himself prepared, and he goes looking for this information. Where is this man claiming to be a prophet? And what he does is he takes a tray of dates to him, and he says, "This is charity. Here, it's for you." Right? And the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he said, "Thank you." And he didn't eat anything from it. He distributed it to all the people there. So Salman said, "This is the first sign." And then a couple nights later, Salman was able to take his earnings and buy another tray of dates, and he took it to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and he said, "This is a gift to you." And so the Prophet ate from it, and he shared it with all the people that was present. Now the Prophet had a shawl over his shoulders at the time, and what happened is Salman tried to walk around the Prophet. He wanted to see the back of the Prophet. So the Prophet seen what he was doing, and he lowered the shawl so that the mark of prophethood could be seen on his back. And as soon as Salman saw this, he ran up and he grabbed the Prophet from behind and started squeezing him and hugging him. And he instantly declared his faith. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, what is this all about? What's going on here? And so Salman shared this story. Salman was a Christian. Salman was not just a Christian, he was an academic. He was a learned man. He had spent his whole entire life from childhood to old age studying with bishop after bishop, traveling and spending their whole lifetime taking knowledge from them. He was a firm believer, dedicated to his faith. And when he heard the signs of prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he went on that journey. And when he met the Prophet, he recognized those signs, those prophecies that was told to him by the Christians, right? By the Christians. And he instantly entered faith. So I say all of that to say that why did Christianity spread around the world? Because it's not all heretical. You know, there's still people. There were still people who believed in the truth. There were still people who were preserving the truth and carrying the truth to their people. And so we have to understand that, you know, God gives victory to who he wants for his reasons, out of his wisdom. And so if he wants this message preserved, if he wants the message that the prophet will be the Parakletos, the comforter will come, then he will preserve it so that the people can take that message, so the people can benefit from that message. And this is, you know, this is an understanding that I have.
Hmm. Well, obviously, Christianity did do something good for Europeans because, uh, at the very least, it told Europeans that they were no longer to practice the pederasty that the ancient Greeks and Romans did and were forbidden adultery, fornication, sodomy, and bestiality. So I suppose that helped them to um, conquer the world.
Right.
Until they
Yeah.
forgot about it and decided they didn't believe in it anymore because it's so hard to believe.
I'll go back to this, you know, God, I believe in God. And what I understand is you're an agnostic. And, you
Yes.
know, that's something worth exploring. But what I will say is that even the fact that, because even I've seen your comments on Twitter and the like, and you'll say, you know, this book is it's got guidance for mankind in it. And so even that claim that you make that it has guidance for mankind in it, this is a kind of claim to divinity, right? Because a man cannot, a man is not going to be able to give guidance to all of humanity, you know. And so my thing here is God has always taken care of man. It's a covenant between God and mankind that he will send guidance to us so that we can be upright. And we have to know what to believe. We have to know the reality behind things so that we can build a relationship with our creator. We have to have rules and regulations so that we can interact as a society. We have to have proper etiquette, you know, all of these things. So God revealed from time to man, and in every instance, he raised up from a people a prophet from amongst themselves, communicating to them in their language according to their background. And so in China there was a Chinese, you know, Laozi, I believe Laozi was a prophet, and the Tao Te
Mhm.
Ching is scripture. I believe Socrates was a prophet of God. I don't like propagate this. Oh, you have to believe this. No, person can accept it or reject it. But I believe that Socrates was a prophet of God, and I have my reasons for that. So each people received from amongst their own people, not a foreigner coming in speaking a foreign language, or even a foreigner coming in trying to impose something on them. They had from amongst themselves prophets raised with scriptures and guidance for them how to live, how to treat each other justly, how to be with their family, and the like. And so then with the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as I mentioned last time, this is simply a continuation. It's a culmination of all of those previous messages. Why? Because all of those messages, they were people who they might be in contact, but they weren't actually sharing ideas on a global scale. And with the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, this is where globalism, if you will, this is where ideas started really spanning from all the way from Spain through North Africa, all the way to China, literally. And so there was this shared idea, this shared communication. And so from that point till now, there's guidance for all of humanity. So this message of Islam, anybody who says, well, Christianity was revealed to Jesus, okay, I disagree with that because, Christianity, as we already said, has been altered. But the message delivered to Jesus is no different than the message that we are saying now. The message that was received by Abraham, the message that was received by Moses, all of it, the message is the same. The laws did change slightly, but the message is the same. And so anybody who says, I'm a Christian, then they should say Islam holds true. There's truth to be found in Islam. Why? Because it's the same message. How can you accept your religion, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Worship your God and my God. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. You hold all of those things to be true, and then you say when the Muslim says there's only one God, don't ascribe any partner or equal to him. Oh, these people are on deviance. Wait, hold on. Wait, the message is the same, right? And so the reality is that there is a clear progression of this message that culminates in Islam. So regardless of what a person's background, what their ancestral religion might be, and this is what we find again and again in the Quran, is God telling people, why are you clinging to the faith, the ways of your ancestors, when something better has now come to you, right? And so this message is universal. It's for all people, and it's there to establish justice for all of humanity. Again, not just believers, even disbelievers, and even the worst of people, the hypocrites. And so this message is there. If people would just take the time to really ask what is being said.
Yes, and answer the simple question that, if they don't think the Quran is the best available guide to humanity, then what is?
Mm, mm. No, absolutely. What's the alternative? And that's always going to be the question. What's the alternative? And as I mentioned, for people who reject, for actual atheists who reject any faith, then the only real alternative is anarchy. And I went to my chiropractor the other day, and we was having a conversation, and he said something interesting to me. He said in his experience, he's a Christian himself. He said in his experience, the only people who are atheists are those people who they don't want any authority over them. They don't want responsibility. He said one of the leading things that he finds in people who deny or reject the existence of God is that they also reject any form of authority being over them, and they don't want to be held responsible for anything. And I think that this is a reality, whereas when we believe in God, there's an ultimate responsibility and there's an ultimate authority. And so if a person believes in that there's an ultimate responsibility and ultimate authority, then the guidance of God is going to be the ultimate answer, the ultimate guidance for mankind. But if a person does not accept that and they reject the notion of God, then the absolute best form of governance for such people is actually anarchy, where do whatever you want as long as you don't impose upon other people's ability to do what they want. But that's a myth. It's a myth. It's not even possible. So that's a whole nother issue, right?
Why is it not possible? Perhaps you'll.
Well, because if I want to do something, right? Let's say I'll use the example of playing loud music. I want to play loud music. It's in my yard. I'm having a cookout or something like this, and I want to play really loud, rock music or rap music or whatever. And my neighbor just wants a quiet evening at home. They just want to relax. Maybe they want to read a book. Well, if I want to play my music loud, then I'm usurping their ability to just have a quiet night at home, right?
Mhm.
And they can come and complain and say, can you turn it down? But now they're asking me to give up my right, right? They're asking me to give up my right. Similarly, with anarchy, speed limits. Who imposes speed limits? If I want to go 65 and I feel safe, then I should be able to go 65, right? Now, that if somebody's going, even this is a silly example, but it's true enough. If somebody refuses to go beyond 45 or 50 miles an hour, then they're actually infringing upon my right to go faster. So I use that silly example just to say that somebody else's enjoining their freedom, what they want to do, right? Their anarchy, I should say, what they want to do, it limits another person's ability. For the most part, we can say, oh, I can do this and you can do that, and I won't oppress you. I won't take your ability to earn a living or something like that. But there's little things that happen between neighbors that will always compromise that the reality of anarchy.
I see. I see. Hmm. Much food for thought.
Mhm.
But I mean, I see as an agnostic that obviously, these atheists will say, "Oh, I don't like the Quran. How about the Communist Manifesto? How about Mein Kampf? How about whoever, some some man who will eventually be dead?" And
Mhm.
then people will just call you, well, a dead person. Why should anybody listen to a dead person? You know?
Well,
And,
this
and that is the failure of all these secular political ideologies.
there's another reality in Islam where the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said that wisdom is the lost property of the believers. Wherever he finds it, he takes it. And so if there is wisdom in the Communist Manifesto, it's not completely devoid of good ideas. There are some things that we say, hey man, that's a good point.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
that's even the Bible. Nobody could say, for example, even though I will say, all of the epistles are letters from Paul, who other disciples disagreed with first and foremost. And so, on certain points, I should say. So these are letters by somebody who was not an apostle of Jesus. He was not a student of Jesus. He never met Jesus in real life, right? Peace and blessings be upon him. And he wrote these letters telling the church how the church is supposed to be. So these are letters from a man who is not a student of Jesus, right?
mhm,
But are they devoid of wisdom? Are they devoid of goodness? No, they're not. You could still find wisdom there. You can still find goodness there, even though they're not revealed books of God. And so my
mhm,
point being is that we can take benefit, we could take wisdom from all over. But when it comes to the truth, what is true guidance, what is really good and what is really bad, then we have to have a backbone. We have to have a spine that tells us that that's not it's flexible, but it's fixed, right? So
mhm,
that where we take that, we as believers, myself as a believer in Islam, I believe that the guidance of God is found in the Quran, and I believe that that's fixed but flexible. And so that serves as my criteria for truth and falsehood. That serves as my criteria for good and bad, for right and wrong. And all of these other things, they're written by man, right? And so we can take benefit from them, but they're not the ultimate truth. They're not the
mhm.
ultimate truth. They have part of the truth. They have some wisdom, whereas the Quran is nothing but truth and wisdom. And again, this comes from a place of faith. This comes, of course, from a place of faith.
Yes, because the Quran is supposed to come from the supreme authority. You know,
Exactly.
even if you don't believe in it, hypothetically, it's still a very strong idea.
Well, I mean, my thing is that, if there's any contradictions in the Quran, if there's any falsehood in the Quran, then a person can point to that and say that this isn't from God, or this is just wrong, or this is bad, right? Or something like that. But nobody can point to the Quran and say this. And therefore, if nobody, and this is again one of the reasons why I entered Islam, is because if I can't find something wrong with it, that automatically must mean that it's right. And so if there's nothing that a person can oppose with other than my sensibilities, oh, I don't feel that this is good. Oh, I don't like this personally, right? So these are subjective or relative feelings about something. Oh, I don't like the idea of a thief getting his hand cut off. I personally know that there was some thieves from the Philippines that was caught in the early 90s in Saudi Arabia. They were stealing. They were Christian, and they got caught stealing, and the government cut their hands off. They argued, oh no, we're not Saudi citizens. We are from the Philippines. This isn't fair. They got their hands cut off. Every one of them entered Islam after their hand got cut off, because they said, because of the justice that this does, the wisdom behind it that we learn from this, then we believe that this is the true message. So my point being is that outside of people's sensibilities, oh, I don't like this, right? You can't point to the Quran and say this is actually wrong, or this is a contradiction, or something like that. You can't do that. And so if it's not wrong, then we accept that. Common sense says that we accept that it's right, right? And so if something is right from the beginning to the end, then we should adhere to it as much as we're able to.
Mm, can't disagree there.
This is there's an important point here, and that is that I think that me and you, we're actually on two ends of a spectrum, and what I mean by that is that it seems to me, and I could be right, I could be wrong, that a lot of your focus is top down, whereas my focus is bottom up. And so you talk about political systems, and you talk about establishing constitutions and laws and things like that, whereas I believe that it has to start with the people. And so the very first thing is that, as a believer, as a Muslim, I would say a masjid, but somebody could say a community center, or whatever they want to say. There has to be a central location where there's leadership. There has to be actual leadership, and that leadership has to come from amongst the people. And then from that center, again, I would say a masjid, but from that center, you would establish borders. This is our neighborhood. This is our community. And then you have to have, along with the borders, you have to have people that move into that area because they're committed, because they believe in this idea, because they're willing to sacrifice and go through the hardships that come with trying to establish something. And they come into that area, and they recognize the leadership, and they respect that leadership, and the leadership respects them, and there's trust abounding. So these are the first steps. And then from that, you establish an education system where the people learn about their community, learn about the laws, learn about academics as well, of course. So in this way, there's education, and from that education, you produce your own scholars, you produce your own leaders, you produce your own people, real human beings that are able to think for themselves and produce. And then along with that, you establish your own economics. So in economics, I mean that you have your own stores, right? You don't you keep your money. The Jews are very popular for this, that they want their money to circulate amongst themselves 3, 4, 5 times before it goes outside the Jewish community. And the same way, this community, I would say this Islamic community, and I'll touch on that term Islamic in a minute. This Islamic community, their money stays amongst themselves. So they hire their own plumbers, their own electricians, their own carpenters, their own tailors. They go buy their cell phone or electronics from their own stores and the like within that community, within the boundaries of that community. And so their money is gaining power. What's more is that they can establish their own currency. And this is something that's not unfounded, and it's been done in the United States. It's still working in the United States, where there's independent neighborhood currencies. And so the Muslims could do this, or the Islamic community, I should say, could do this. And so they have their center, they have their leader, they have their borders, they have the people living within those borders, their area of control, if you will. They establish their economic system, they establish their economic education system, and along with that, they have their own court system. So they have a system of arbitration. Of course, this isn't going to affect criminal law because they don't have authority in the land, but they can still have arbiters between family cases, between civil cases, and the like. And again, this is something that's already done. This isn't something, oh, this is crazy talk. No, this is done amongst Amish communities. This is done amongst Jewish communities. This is done just in regular communities. There's arbiters to prevent, so that people could deal with differences between neighbors without having to take it to the larger court system. And so again, having our own arbiters or court system with our own judges and the like, or arbiters, not judges, but, and then along with that, along with all of that, giving back and serving the greater community. So they're not isolationists to where they're closing off from people, but rather they're helping, they're taking their strength and helping the people around them. And so if we could start that and then form networks of this, confederacies, where these people do it in this state, those people do it in this. We have to remember that America, the United States of America, is almost, it spans the width of an entire continent. And so there's 50 states. It's like 50 different nations. And so each of these nations have smaller states within them. We call them cities, of course. But I mean, there's states here in the U.S. that are larger, states in the U.S. that are larger than European countries. And we have cities, I believe Los Angeles is larger than some European countries. And so the fact is that in these different locales, we set up these centers, and then we have confederacies between them to where we build a network. And then from that, this is when you arrive at that, when you have your central location, when you have your own leadership, when you have your borders and your community there, when you have your own economics, your own education, and your own arbitration, and you're serving the greater community, that's called semi-autonomy. From that place of semi-autonomy, now you have a position where you can actually have representatives going to the greater society and representing your minority society within there. So now what happens is that you don't have a need for police to constantly patrol your area because you've secured it. You've kept it clean. You've kept the crime out. If somebody is committing crimes, you deal with that. You don't have the police come in and deal with it. So you don't need the authority of the larger government, the federal or state government. You don't need their authority anymore because you've established your own semi-autonomous state, if you will. I don't want to use that word, but semi-autonomous region within the greater state. And so this is what I work towards. And I'm not saying that we're getting there or anything like that, but this is what I call from the bottom up, because then we don't have to rely upon the state. We don't have to rely upon their military, their courts, their police forces, their taxation. We don't have to rely upon any of that, because we've set up semi-autonomous regions, and we've built from the ground up. We built ourselves up as a people, right? And so I believe that bottom up is the organic, if you will, the organic model. Whereas I think that if we go from a top down, we'll find people opposing it, feeling oppressed, feeling that there's an injustice being done. And so you'll see people rebelling, and they feel disenfranchised. And so they actually find ways to circumvent it. Whereas if they're part of that movement, if they're part of that effort, then they actually feel empowered, and they want it to succeed because they want to succeed. And so they actually comply. And when I say comply, I mean they live a life of respect for the efforts that are being made.
Well, it could be done both ways in a sort of pincer movement.
No, of course, of course.
But that's I mean, I suppose you try every which way you can to promote the message and see which one works best. So this is what you're trying to do with your semi-autonomous community, and you've already got schools and other people around you.
Well, I'm not making any claims to what I've done. I'm just struggling. I'm just the guy struggling. But we see these moves being made, and so we see the schools opening. Now, me myself, I'm a teacher in a particular community. But again, it's as simple, and we do have, this is the area around our masjid, getting people to commit, getting people to be serious and move into these areas and trust. This is the biggest problem. And the reason that that's such a huge problem is because everybody's stuck in the rat race. Everybody fears, well, if I do this, then I lose this, or I lose that, or what if this fails? And so there's a real fear factor that occurs that hinders people. And this is why, again, it has to come from the heart. It can't come from being imposed upon a people. It has to come from within them.
Mm-hmm. This idea of a shadow community, I'm vaguely aware that this is something that some white nationalists are trying to organize, but I suppose Muslims have a bigger advantage in that they have their places of religious worship that these people who are trying to do the same thing don't have. And they don't have a system of rules either, which I imagine make it even harder for them.
A lot of groups do this. Again, we could point to the Amish. Amish is probably one of the most successful groups who do this. And they have all of these elements that I just mentioned. They are absolutely semi-autonomous. The Amish community here in the United States. Many Jewish communities are like this here in the United States. There are some Muslim communities. There are some that come out of the African American civil rights movement. Muslims, I'm talking about, who
Mhm.
established, like towns called New Medina and things like that here. There's also immigrants that, I know of a Pakistani community that did this in upstate New York. And so and of course there's black nationalist groups, there's white supremacist groups, there's all of these different types of groups who attempt this. And a lot of times what happens, and this is what we have to be aware of, is that the United States doesn't want this to succeed. And so what they do is they send agent provocateurs into these communities, people who they seem like they're good, they seem like they're energetic, and they start getting in the mix. And what they do is they sow deception, they sow corruption, they sow distrust. And so these groups, and a lot of times, a lot of cases, these groups fall apart because of these agent provocateurs. And sometimes it's not even agent provocateurs, sometimes it's just ego. And so this person wants to be, why has he got the power? Why is everybody listening to him? Why is he popular? I want that for myself. And so they try to undercut the other people. And what they do is that they then, destroy the effort altogether. And we see this again and again. So religious communities absolutely have the advantage in this. Why? Because we do have centers of worship, and we do have a code of guidance that we're going to follow. We're not making it up. And so
Mhm.
if a person wanted to point to black nationalists or white nationalists, and they're the same thing, there's no difference between the two. Both of them, have these same mentalities, and it's all based upon something as flimsy as their outer form. But these groups, they make up their rules as they go along. What is our charter? What is our mission statement? What do we think is best for us? Whereas a religious community is going to always ask, what does God want from us? What is it that we could do to please our Lord? And so they actually have the advantage all the way around from any kind of nationalist group. And I think that I was it was mentioned to me that, and I have also seen this guy, I think his name's Jesus or something like that, he goes by on Twitter,
Hmm.
mentioning, white nationalism, and how, there's uh surrounding yourself, following you, there's these white nationalists. And I would say, I don't know, but I'm just saying, we hear these things. The reality is that, I wrote Message to the White Man in America, and in it, throughout that entire book, I am addressing a white audience. I am talking about the problems of whiteness, this concept of whiteness, things that are unique to the white people in America, and our problems and how we can solve those problems. I am addressing a white audience, absolutely, and but at the same time, never is there any confusion, or never should there be any confusion, that this message is for white people, or this is a tool to be used to somehow propagate white supremacist thought, or white nationalist movements, or something like that. No, this is a call to humanity. And the reality is that the reason we address the Message to the White Man in America, that has its own history, as I mentioned. It's taken directly from Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man in America. So it's just mirroring that. But having said that, it's important to understand that, it's giving a message to a people who that message was hidden from. That message was kept from white people. And when I say white people, I mean Europeans, in general, from East to West Europe. It was, for the most part, suppressed from the common people. And a lot of times, what you find, when the common people would interact with Muslims, you find them entering Islam. And this happened throughout Europe. So you have these anecdotes of, oh, this person became a Muslim, or that person became a Muslim. And a lot of times it was diplomats or traders or something like that that interacted with actual real live Muslims, and they wasn't listening to what they was told. So this message of Islam was suppressed from the common folk of Europe. And today we have an ability to communicate this message clearly to our own people. And so anything that I say about, Message to the White Man in America, as an example, it's talking about communicating, being somebody who is white myself, communicating that message that is a universal message of humanity to all, to my own people, but knowing full well that this isn't a tool to somehow propagate we're better, we're the superior people, we're the chosen people, we're smarter than, we're more industrious than, none of these ideas, because all of these ideas are we can say steeped in ignorance, and so this message is a universal message, and from that message is that we are all of humanity was created by our Lord, and our skin tone and our features and our language are nothing but signs of God. It's nothing but signs of God. And so to take it as a point of pride or arrogance is itself a disease from our hearts. And so I mention that just because I want to be very clear that I do talk about establishing Muslim centers or Muslim communities where we find white converts able to, and this maybe will be able to take us full circle to where we began, because there was something that was mentioned at the very beginning that we never touched upon, but communities where white Muslims can actually feel comfortable, and we can have our own scholarship, we can have our own leadership, and we can actually live our Islam and according to our own cultural backgrounds in our own communities in a way that is conducive to our time and place, but without distorting it at all. And so we serve a greater community. And so again, I just want to make clear that there's no, even though a white nationalist or a white supremacist might watch this and say, this is a great idea, we could use this, right? The fact is that it's not a tool to be used. It's a message to be lived. And we don't distort it, we don't mix it with our own diseases. So having said that, taking it all the way back, and the reason that this is important is because why is it important to have white centers where white people are comfortable and they have their own leadership and their own scholarship? This is important because white converts, again, this message has been kept from Europeans in general for a long time, not by Muslims. Muslims have tried to communicate this message. Spain was a Muslim land at one point. The problem is that the church, the authorities, kept the people from receiving this message. And so, or they allowed them to receive it in a very distorted way. For example, still some people will claim Allah is the moon god, or we pray to Muhammad. They make these allegations because they don't know any better. And the fact is that so white people entering into Islam has always been a minority, has always been a kind of fringe, right? And so what happens is Islam in these lands is already a minority, and then the white Muslim becomes a minority within the minority. We become a fringe within a fringe group, right? And so from the Muslim side, we're kept at an arm's length because people will say, well, we don't know if they're agents, or we don't know their intentions, or we don't know, and so there's doubt concerning our Islam. That's a reality, is that you'll find people holding us, either that or they want to raise us up as a mascot, right? And this, both are basically harmful. And then on the other side, you have the white people who are our own community, sometimes our own family members, who will say, "Oh, you're a traitor. You're if you were a white supremacist." I know a couple Muslims who were white supremacists, and they get accused of being race traitors, and other labels like this. And so now we're Muslim, so the white people see us as other. If I walk down the street in just the way that I am now, people will say they won't see my whiteness, they'll see my Islam, and that's just the reality. So on the Muslim side, we're kept at arm's length, and on the side of our own people in our own communities, we're now othered, right? And so we're between these two communities. The fact is that we belong to both of them. We have a right over both of them, or in both of them, but we're held kind of in the middle where we don't have our own place. We don't know where we belong, where we fit in. And so this actually hurts a lot of white converts, is that they don't know their place. They don't know where they fit in. And so you see white Muslims trying to adopt different people's cultures, or hiding their Islam, or whatever the case might be. This is why we have to have our own areas or communities where we raise up our own families, our own leadership, our own scholarship, so that we're not pushed aside by one side. And also white people recognize us. Oh, they're us, but they have this other faith. And so we have to establish ourselves so that we become a community like other communities. And it's not, this isn't unique to white people. Again, there's a Pakistani masjid right down the street from my house. That's who runs it. They do things according to the way that they do things back in Pakistan. If I go in there and try to change things up and say, no, it should be like this, they're not going to listen to me. Why? Because they're doing what they do back at home. There's a Turkish masjid about 40 minutes from my house. It looks like it's straight out of Turkey. It's called the Diyanet Center. It's a beautiful masjid. It looks like it's a classical Islamic architecture. But they run things according to, they have Turkish leadership, they have Turkish scholarship, and they do things the same way they do back home. And then at the same time, now we have, for example, the Black Imams Roundtable, where these leaders from the East Coast, I don't think any of them is on the West Coast of the United States. Most of them are East Coast based. But these African American imams, they get together and they talk and they discuss problems within the African American Muslim community, so that they could solve the problems of their own community. So this isn't something I'm saying, oh, white people should do this, and this is unique to us. I even know Hispanic people who will do this, and this way they can bring because they're family oriented a lot of times anyway, and so this way they can bring their family into this way of life. So this isn't, I'm not saying, oh, white people should do this and nobody else should do it. No, this is what other people are doing and have been doing, and we also need to step up our game, is basically what I'm saying.
Perhaps you could get some documentary maker to make a documentary about your community and how these things start.
I want to be very clear about this, and this is important. I wrote Message to the White Man in America. I'm saying this, and I'm not saying this repeatedly so I could get attention. I'm saying this because there's a point to be made here. I'm the assistant imam of an African American community in the inner city of Baltimore. My community is not white, and honestly, there's maybe a dozen, maybe a dozen white people around me, and half of them are my family. So the reality is that I don't want to give anybody the false impression that I'm establishing this utopian semi-autonomous state with white community and white leadership or anything like that. No, I'm part of a greater. I'm part of an inner city community where the people around me are African American, and the everything that I write in Message to the White Man in America applies equally to this African American community. And in fact, I could say it's widely accepted amongst my peers and my community. It's much appreciated by them. The only people that ever actually had a problem with these ideas are white converts who have these sensitivities towards it. So I said that because I just want to be very clear that though we talk about these things and though we've written about them and though we call to them, the fact is that I'm part of an African American community, because there are no white communities at this point. Maybe in Texas, Allahu Island. God knows best. Sorry.
Right, right. So your hope would be for different American Muslims in different parts of America to basically do what you're trying to do in their different parts of America.
My hope would be that indigenous Muslims, and when I say indigenous Muslims, I want to be very clear with what I mean. I mean First Nation tribes, I mean Latinos, I mean African American, and I mean white Americans, right? Not immigrants. This is basically what I'm saying. Not people, not first and second grade, even third generation immigrants. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the people who have been in this country for 4 generations or more. These people need to set up their own communities, raise up their own people from amongst themselves, their own leadership from amongst themselves, their own scholarship from amongst themselves. Stop having an inferiority complex when somebody comes from Pakistan and they wear a turban and they have a big beard. You think they know more than you, or they have more right to Islam than you. We need to set up our own institutions to where we're raising our own communities, and we have confidence in who we are, and we have power in who we are, and we're not looking to other people to see, oh, what do they say? We're not asking Saudi Arabia, what do you think about this, or can we do that, or can we not do that? We're not asking permission from anybody else. We're not importing leaders. We're not importing scholarship. And I think that we don't have to do it based upon ethnicity. And I think that isolating ethnicities got its own problems. But the reality is that this is often how it happens, that African Americans are in a location, Latinos are in a location, white folk are in a location. That doesn't mean that we don't interact, but we're in our own location. And so, for example, the African American community that I'm in, maybe two or three white Muslims, I'll say my family, and maybe one other white family goes to that community. The rest of the people are generally speaking African American. So I'm not saying that we isolate ourselves based on ethnic backgrounds, but I'm saying that the indigenous people of America need to establish these centers of semi autonomy. Then they need to confederate and network so that we build strength. And the reason is because we have rights that are different than immigrant Muslims. We do. And we have concerns that are different from immigrant Muslims. And we have realities that are different from immigrant Muslims. And we have a mentality that are different, very different from immigrant Muslims. And so a lot of these immigrant Muslims, and I'll just be honest with you, and that is that they came to America because they want the American dream. They left Islam because they didn't like the Muslim lands. They didn't like where they were. They want the American dream. Whereas most Americans are like, look, that's a myth. You know, we live in the reality, and we deal with it as we always have. You know, and so we have a different mindset. We have a different aim. We have, you know, and so our realities are different, and so our needs are different. And that's what I'm saying, is that I'm not saying that, you know, African Americans should do this, Latinos should do this, white people should do this, Pakistanis should do this. I'm saying indigenous Muslims have to set up these centers of semi-autonomy and build their strength, work together, network, confederate, and this is where our power is. And then when people want to come from other countries, when the Pakistani person wants to come to our land, then they come under our authority, right? They come under our authority, and that's the Islamic way. So this is a good opportunity to mention this, is that historically it was unlawful. It is unlawful for a non-Muslim to leave the Muslim land. And so let me take a step back and say, what is the difference? Because you touched on this earlier, but I want to be very clear. What's the difference between a Muslim land and an Islamic land? The difference is that an Islamic land is governed by Islam, right? It is governed by the Sharia, and it has Islamic governance, right? Completely. Now, a Muslim land has two qualifications. One is the leadership. This is the most popular. This is the traditional meaning of a Muslim land. A Muslim land is any land that has a Muslim as its leader, right? But today, it's also in any majority Muslim. So if the land is majority Muslim, let's say 80% Muslim, then we call it a Muslim land, even if the leadership is not a Muslim, even if it's not governed by Islam. So most of the lands in the world, there is no Islamic land there's no Islamic country on earth today that I'm aware of. There's not one single Islamic state in the world. The closest thing to an Islamic state is Mauritania, right? It's Mauritania. But having said that, these Muslim lands are in the state that they're in, and they're in varying states. But it was always unlawful for the Muslim to leave the Muslim land and reside, live, set up citizenship in the lands of the disbelievers, right? That's first and foremost. It's illegal. And so what would happen is, in these lands of disbelievers, when a person converted, when they entered into Islam, they would do one of two things. Either they would make a pilgrimage or immigrate to the lands of the Muslims, or they would start setting up these autonomous communities where they would build their own people networks in their land, these communities. Now, when a foreigner, an immigrant, would come to this land, they would go and they would reside in that area, and they would be under the leadership of that area, right? And so they couldn't go and become a citizen, you know, amongst the disbelievers and just do whatever they wanted. No, they would have to come and they would have to pledge loyalty or allegiance to the leader of the Muslims in that land. Now, today, what the reality is that you have immigrants coming, they hide amongst the population, and then next thing you know, they say, we want a masjid, so they open a masjid. We want a school, so we open a school. And there's a masjid right down the street. So, for example, this is classic. It's in my city, but it's classic. You see it everywhere in the West, is that we have an indigenous Muslim community that's been in this city for over 40 years. Close to 50, actually 50 years it's been in this community. And it's African American leadership, African American education system in that community. Then you have somebody from Pakistan who comes. They don't even know that community exists. They never check where are the Muslims. They simply open their own masjid and they run it according to. This is un-Islamic. This is completely un-Islamic, and it's not really acceptable. So the role of the indigenous Muslim is to set up a center, a Darul Islam, a place of Islam, an Islamic center, if you will, of semi-autonomy, that when a person wants to immigrate, they come under the authority of the indigenous Muslims. They're not over the Muslims. They're not coming as teachers and guides and leaders. No, they're coming under to help and to benefit that community, to build that community. And so this, we can't get there unless we build ourselves up. And so all of that to say that the Muslims really have to put in the work. And again, it's not based on ethnicity. It should never be based upon ethnicity, but rather the indigenous Muslims always have a different status than the immigrant Muslims in any land, And as an example, not getting too far off track, I think I already have, but if I was to go to Pakistan and try to open up the American masjid in Pakistan, they would shut me down, right? This would not be permitted. I'd have to be under their leadership, under their guidance, under their education, all of these. I would have to help them. They would never support me in building an American masjid. But when they come to our countries, then they want to do just that. They want to establish their own communities, their own masajid, their own education system, and they want us to support them and be amongst them. Where in fact, we already have our communities. Their role is to support our communities, to strengthen our communities, not have us dissipate, not to have our energy and our wealth and our time divided amongst our own people and their people. And this is one of the reasons why we're weak.
So it's a matter of organization. Is there such an organization in America called the, I don't know, the Society of American Muslims, or the National Society, something like that?
There's three, right? And this is the problem, is that whenever you have these organizations, there's actually three major ones. There's more. You have CARE, right? The Council of American Islamic Relations. You have ICNA, the Islamic Convention of North America, or something like this. And then you have ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. And these are three big ones. But this is the problem, is what are these? They're vying for leadership. They're vying for power. They're vying. We're the ones who are trying to do this. We're the ones. And so actually these three organizations seldom cooperate. They feign cooperation, but really each one is trying to get a leg up on the other. And so this is again why I say it has to start at the bottom and work up, because when you start at the top, then you get egos involved, and you get power hungry people who want to be, they have this love of prestige in their hearts. And so it's a problem. I agree
Well,
that,
you can
the
get them
two
to
have to work
merge.
together. Yeah,
Yes.
it'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and then they can choose a leader under the, I don't know, the rules of the papal conclave or something.
Right now, one of the best organizations that deserves the most support it's called MANA, right? MANA. I think it's the Muslim Association. I believe that the A is for association, but the Muslim Association of North America. Why do I say that they're the most important, and they're the ones that need the most support and deserve the most support? And ISNA, ICNA, and CARE should be under their authority, because they're indigenous Muslims. They're the African American. They're founded by African Americans. They're not all African Americans. There's other people on that council. But my point being is that they're American, indigenous Muslim Americans. People, many of them have entered Islam or are second generation Muslims, who they're scholars, and they're addressing the needs of our people. Whereas ICNA, ISNA, and CARE, 90% of them are immigrant Muslims who are trying to politicize. They're really trying to bring in their political ideologies into this, whereas MANA is really something that's trying to serve the American Muslims. And so if any organization deserves to be central, I'm not part of it. I'm familiar with it, but I'm not part of it. But if any of them deserve to have that centralized leadership role, it would be MANA. And reality, God knows best in reality.
And um, I I was wondering if you have any name in mind as to a Muslim that promotes, or an Islamic scholar that meets with your approval. I don't know what the
There's a
um,
lot of Muslim scholars, and I mean, first and foremost, let me just say that my approval isn't important. It really isn't. But there's the fact is that you're going to find controversy no matter who I say, no matter what name I mention. There's always going to be controversy because this is the nature of humanity. So I mean, you have a great example of an amazing intellectual. Um, he Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. He was just on with Jordan Peterson maybe 2 weeks ago or something like this. This is a great example of an American who entered into Islam, and he's establishing Islamic identity in America, and he has been for 30 years. And then you also have Sheikh Yahya Rodis, who is a younger scholar, who actually, I mean, he's around my age, but he's a younger scholar, and he's also establishing a center of Islamic identity in his location. And then you have Imam Amin in Atlantic City. So I mean, the list is actually, there's many different scholars who there's Imam Naim in Pittsburgh. There was one great scholar who actually much of what I communicated today, I took and benefited from him tremendously in this area, but he's no longer an American citizen. He gave up his citizenship and became a citizen of Mali, and that is Sheikh Mohammed Sharif ibn Farid. And so the reality, may Allah preserve him, the reality is that there's a lot of really wonderful scholars. There's a lot of wonderful scholars, and again, I'm talking about Americans who they entered Islam, or they're second generation Muslim, and they're scholars and they're leaders, and they're calling to what is upright. And so there's a lot. And again, anybody I name, there's going to be some controversy around, because that's the nature of humans.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, the list is long, and
Mhm.
it's unfortunate because you'll hear people say something like, there's no scholars in America. There's no Islamic scholars in America. But I could literally go down and just name, and I'm not talking about immigrants. Like, there are immigrant scholars here, of course, great high level immigrant scholars in America. But we can go down a list and just talk about those people who are from the African American community, the white community, the Latino community, who they're high. I don't want to say they're high level scholars. Some of them are, as I mentioned, Hamza Yusuf and the like. But the scholarship is here. The leadership is here amongst our own people. We don't have to look for other people. Look to other people for this.
Mhm. Mhm. Hmm. Well, well, thank you very much for giving, informing us of the difficulties you face and all the different organizations that might or might not be helpful to your cause. It's, I suppose a lot of these problems are organizational as well as maybe spiritual,
Absolutely,
people.
absolutely. I don't want to I don't, because it's been 2.5 hours. I don't know if people can bear 2.5 hours of me, but I so I'll wrap this up. And the one thing that I do want to say is that all of these efforts that I'm talking about, community building, networking, semi-autonomy, even the rules, even secular Quranism, it has this, even though it's secular in nature, what you're talking about is secular in nature. The fact is that it has to start with a trust in the message. And so people have to come to know the message. People have to come, they have to do their research and find out, what is the Quran? What is the message of the Quran? What is the Sharia? People have to do their due diligence. And I would hope that as people build a relationship with this message, speaking of the Quran specifically, that their hearts will be affected, and they'll come to recognize the reality of God, the existence of God. And there's many ways to prove the existence of God. Perhaps I shouldn't use that term, since there's many ways to show that, there's many ways to establish, I'll use that word, there's many ways to establish evidence-based rational faith in the existence of God. And so we have to start with hearts. If you want people to obey laws, then there has to be trust. In order for to be trust, there has to be some kind of respect and knowledge that's being shared, a message that's being communicated. And so, we, rather than starting with laws, we really have to start with, calling people to just be human again, just calling people back to their own humanity. Stop acting like animals, stop acting like beasts, stop. What's the song say? You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. Let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. This is how people behave now, right? This is how people are behaving, like we're nothing but animals. Let's copulate in public and freely. I got an app that I could swipe to the left and say, hey, she looks good. Let me go see if she'll let me sleep with her tonight. And I don't have this app, but I'm saying, there's these apps out there, and so
Mhm.
people are behaving in ways that are subhuman. This is subhuman behavior. And the very first thing that we have to really call people back to is their own humanity. The rules and regulations are there to help us with that, but the fact is that people just have to, they have to realize their own humanity. And once they do this, I think that they'll want to grow, they'll want to transform, and they'll want to do what's right. And God knows best about these things.
Thank you. Well, I hope we will have, I'm sure we will have further topics to discuss. And I thank you for um, sharing your time with us and explaining to us the organizational difficulties, perhaps, of the indigenous American Muslim.
I thank you for having me. And the only thing is that if we do this again, I would highly recommend that you send me a topic to discuss, so that I don't ramble all over the place like I did today.
I
But
don't think
hopefully
you
there's
have at
benefit.
all. No, no.
Okay.
I think it, I suppose I don't want it to seem like, oh, it's some lecture I have to prepare for or
Mm.
whatever. And I think, if it's free flowing, I can, we just let the conversation take us naturally, and then I discover what you're trying to do and what the difficulties are, and a lot of incidental things on the way. I think I found it, very educational, and I don't think it's lacked structure at all because you speak very clearly. And anyway, I found it very beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. What I will say, and I'll leave this here, and then I'll say my goodbyes. Is that if anybody does want to ask any questions, or they want to reach out to me, if they want to reach out to me personally, our host Claire has put my Twitter information at the bottom of the last video, and hopefully she could do that here. And you can of course inbox me on Twitter, and I'll respond to you privately there. And it's best to, if you want to ask me something, you can ask me privately or publicly, of course. And then, of course, in the messages, in the comments here on YouTube or wherever this is hosted, I'll try to check them and respond to you there as well. And so, anybody who has any questions about what I said, or you disagree with me and you want to bring a point, then do it, and we'll deal with that, in that way. And so I don't want people to think that I'm here, I talk for this 2.5 hours, you have to listen to me, and there's no room for disagreement. You can always reach out to me. I'm just an average guy like everybody else, and we could just have a conversation.
Thank you. Do you have a YouTube channel or a website
I
or anything like that?
I I have, I'm not really active because I'm a technological caveman, right? So I don't really. I have Facebook, of course. I have a Facebook page, the Indigenous Muslim. I also have the Message to the White Man in America is on Facebook, but it's not very active. I need to be more active. And I also have Message to the White Man in America on YouTube, but there's literally nothing there. So you could find it, but you're not going to find anything on it. I'm working now. Actually, somebody called me a racist last week because they read Message to the White Man in America, and they didn't take time to even watch a single video or read a certain, they didn't do any research. They just seen the name and was like, oh, he's a racist, right? And
Mhm.
so because of that, because of my need to respond to people who don't take time to actually listen, I felt the need that I should go ahead and start making content on YouTube so that we could address this, so we can introduce the book and the ideas in the book. And so hopefully that's forthcoming, but no promises. But so the best place, if somebody wants to watch my lessons or something like that, the best place is the Indigenous Muslim on Facebook. And then, of course, there's Message to the White Man in America on Facebook as well. And we'll try to be more active in these places.
Great. Great. I'll find the if you could give me the links, I'll put them on the description under this video and the previous one, and we can go on from there.
Okay. All right. I'll
Thank,
make sure I get them to you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
it's been a great pleasure. Thank you, William.
All right. Have a good day, rest of your day, and we'll talk again in the future.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.